Acha was undressing beside a widow when his system whispered, "Prey detected." Minutes earlier, a truck had killed him and sent him to 1955. He now occupied the body of a village simpleton. Everyone mocked. Widow Shawan had secretly drawn that supposed fool into the mountains. Then a radar filled his mind with nearby red targets. 3 large signals were already approaching from East Village. Keeping the radar active rapidly drained Acha's physical strength. He escaped unseen, knowing this system could feed his starving family. By nightfall, Acha returned to the mud-brick home where his new family had been waiting through the final days of spring planting. His 14-year-old sister had spent the afternoon worrying. While old he feared his simple-minded sons had followed another village widow into trouble. At the stove stood Liao Xiaomin, the thin young woman his family had brought home, as his wife only 2 days earlier. Acha remembered these people clearly, yet emotionally they still felt like strangers, so he decided to ease into the household instead of forcing intimacy. To avoid exposing his recovery, he kept the old fool's quiet manner and answered his sister with only a stiff, harmless smile. Dinner was unusually generous for the family. Dough soup, wild greens, fried grasshoppers, and small buns left over from the wedding. The celebration food was almost gone, however, and the nearly empty grain jar made their next problem impossible to ignore. When his sister tried to fasten the drool bib the old Acha always wore, he refused, giving the family its first visible sign of change. Old he immediately asked whether his son remembered the person who had beaten him senseless 3 years earlier. Acha did remember. The former owner had caught a woman cheating, and her lover nearly killed him before witnesses interrupted the beating. He concealed the attacker's identity because telling old he now might send the furious father straight into a fight that could ruin the family. Instead, Acha changed the subject and insisted that his new wife help him bathe, partly because maintaining the simpleton act still required awkward behavior. Liao Xiaomin entered nervously, expecting unpredictable trouble, but quickly noticed that Acha followed every instruction with suspiciously clear understanding. While she scrubbed his back, Acha
Mentally open beginner package.
the tracking system had promised him on the mountain. The first reward was Sharpshooter, granting perfect accuracy with suitable ranged weapons inside 60 meters. The second reward was a storage space measuring 1,000 cubic meters, large enough to transform hunting, transport, and food preservation. Acha tested the space privately and learned its first limitation. Living people could not enter it. A flower taken from his sister also failed to remain alive inside, confirming that the storage was meant for dead objects and supplies. Even with those limits, combining tracking, perfect aim, and hidden storage gave a starving household an advantage no ordinary mountain hunter possessed. That night, Liao Xiaom curled against the wall, still frightened because her adopted family had taught her to expect punishment rather than kindness. She had grown up eating leftovers, wearing second-hand clothes, and doing endless chores while her prettier sister received the family's protection. The older sister was originally supposed to marry Acha, but she refused the poor household and pushed Liao Xiaomin into the arrangement instead, fearing she could be discarded if she failed as a wife. Xiaomin timidly moved closer after the room went dark. Acha felt her trembling and understood the pressure behind the gesture, so he simply held her and pretended to fall asleep. His restraint let Xiaomin relax for the first time, and she eventually slept without the fear that had followed her into this marriage. At dawn, she slipped from the bed in embarrassment, while Acha quietly returned to the more urgent problem of feeding everyone. There was almost no grain left, and his new marksmanship meant little until he found a weapon or another practical way to hunt. Only a few East Village households owned firearms, making a gun far too expensive for Acha to obtain immediately. He decided to gather wild vegetables first, using the mountain's spring growth to keep the family eating, until a better hunting opportunity appeared. Liao Xiaomin handed him the largest corn bun while keeping the smallest for herself. Another small sacrifice Acha noticed without commenting on it. Before leaving for fieldwork, he warned his son not to cause trouble, not to climb deep into the mountains, and not to follow widows. Acha took a burlap sack and ignored the mountain warning, because the tracking radar made dangerous ground far less blind than it was for ordinary villagers. About an hour later, a large red point appeared on the radar, and Acha approached carefully while activating the draining skill only in short bursts. The target turned out to be Sister Honglian, a 22-year-old hunter from East Village who had stopped beside a cold mountain stream. Acha backed off until she was dressed, then recognized the bold childhood friend who carried a double-barreled hunting gun and knew these mountains well. Honglian inspected his sack and was surprised that the supposed fool had gathered unusually good wild vegetables instead of random weeds. Rather than explain the system, Acha followed her deeper into the woods, hoping her weapon could turn his tracking information into actual meat. Another cluster of red dots soon appeared, and Acha quietly guided Honglian toward it, without revealing how he knew animals were nearby. He stopped about 30 meters away and pretended to dig vegetables, while Honglian searched the brush with a hunter's trained eyes. She finally spotted a roe deer, raised the shotgun, steadied the stock against her shoulder, and fired before the animal could bolt. The shot landed cleanly, and Honglian immediately bled and dressed the deer with the practiced speed of someone raised around hunting. Acha watched every step because marksmanship alone would not help his family if he did not learn how to process game safely. The grown roe deer weighed roughly 50 to 60 pounds, enough meat to matter greatly to several hungry households. Honglian expected the old simpleton to be useless, but Acha helped run a pole through the carcass and carried his share of the load. Their return route narrowed into the only practical trail down Big Timber Mountain, making the two men waiting there impossible to avoid. Xiao Deshan and his companion blocked the path and demanded wild vegetables in exchange for a small portion of Honglian's deer. The demand was not a trade. It was an attempt to exploit the fool they believed would never understand how badly he was being cheated. Honglian signaled Acha not to escalate the situation, worried the men would target him again once they returned to the village. Acha played along outwardly, but the smile vanished from his face as he memorized both men and the threat they had made. He already suspected enemies around the village were connected to the beating that destroyed the former owner's mind. That made every hostile encounter more than a petty argument, because one careless confession could finally reveal who had attacked this body years ago. For now, Acha let Honglian control the confrontation and preserved the simpleton disguise instead of showing how quickly his thinking had recovered. The pair continued downhill with the deer, while Acha used the journey to study tracks, carcass handling, and the practical habits of an experienced hunter. By the time they neared East Village, he understood that the mountains could provide meat, medicine, hides, and income if he learned their rules. The system had given him supernatural advantages, but surviving 1955 would still require knowledge, restraint, and relationships with people who understood the land. Acha, therefore, treated Honglian's hunting experience as seriously as the radar, because one careless mistake in the mountains could still kill him. His first day after transmigration ended with a clearer plan: protect the family, master hunting, earn money, and uncover who had destroyed the original Acha. After the original owner of this body turned simple, they trampled all over him plenty. Too bad this wasn't deep in the mountains. Acha had no shovel in hand. Otherwise, feed them to the animals or bury them in the dirt. Acha could not even be bothered to choose. Sister Honglian crouched down and started cutting the meat. As Xiaorshan spoke, he bent down to snatch her knife. The two brothers shrank back, still scared of that gun after all. Holding back once already had him feeling like a sinner. And Acha was afraid. Acha had truly become a spineless coward. Xiaoxiaoan's face changed in an instant, his hand reaching back for his knife. Sister Holian's double-barreled shotgun was already up, the black muzzle aimed dead center between his brows. Xiao's hand froze midair, then slowly opened. Wait till Acha climbed back up. Acha grabbed Xiaoxiaoan by the collar and tossed him down the embankment like it was nothing. Acha said it to the valley one word at a time. That was so dangerous just now. Sister Honglian, and flicked the safety back on and hurried to grab his shoulder. Watching how earnest she was, Acha suddenly understood. In this world, there really weren't many people willing to reason with a fool to explain the consequences to him. They shouldered the meat and headed down the mountain. Acha glanced back at that slope one more time, the chill in his eyes growing deeper and deeper. As for those 2 pounds of meat, no need to hand them over. His little sister voice tinged with worry. The father who came with this body Acha had inherited had just gotten off work. The old man slammed his farm tools down hard on the ground, his face full of exasperation. The old man grabbed the storm lantern and headed out. Play dumb. Stay alive. Build up his skills, sis. She didn't have to walk him all the way home. She just worried that a dummy like him might not find the door. Then her eyes suddenly went wide. That's how Acha caught this dumb road deer. Acha dropped the road deer in the yard. The hatchets rose and fell. Acha hoisted up one of the front legs and shoved it into Sister Honglian's arms. It was just her kind heart. But Acha could not take advantage of her. Acha grabbed half a sack of fresh angelica shoots too, and pushed them at her. Acha could not be bothered to hear her refuse, so Acha just shoved her out toward the gate. Acha had not even Sister Honglian still wanted to see what his wife looked like. After chasing Sister Honglian off, Acha glanced around. Within a certain range, every living thing showed up as a red dot, all laid out before his eyes. The only reason Acha had managed to survive by playing the fool was thanks to it. That silly wife of his hadn't even brought a torch. Acha nipped his brows and quickened his pace. Acha checked them off one by one. Under the eaves, someone suddenly called out to him. A woman with a hungry gleam in her eyes sidled up, hooked her arm through his, and smiled meaningfully. Acha had to hand it to her. As far as cheating on a husband goes, nobody within miles was this relentless. She even threw him a wink. Another time, torch in hand, Acha bolted without looking back. Behind him came a woman's long, bitter sigh. A woman's voice echoed across the unlit fields, trembling alone. Liao Xiaomin's foot slipped, and she tumbled with a splash into a ditch. She groped her way up in the dark, but everything was pitch black, and she couldn't tell which way was which. The cold, clear water washed over her body. She just lay there with eyes wide open, staring up at the star-filled sky. Motionless memories surged up, scene after scene. The water rose past her ears and flowed over her whole body. The entire world seemed to hold no one but her. She wondered, where was the light coming from? She opened her eyes slowly, and what she saw made her pupils shrink. A thin wisp of burnt smoke curled up and dissolved into the night. She froze for a few seconds before her fear gave way to confusion. Then her two arms suddenly wrapped around his waist, her body trembling with quiet sobs. The wife of this body Acha now inhabited was a girl who didn't even dare to cry out loud. It's being hurt and not even daring to cry out loud. Acha turned around and hoisted her onto his back. She wiped her tears, looking timid. A soft little fist landed on his shoulder. The mood, without either of them noticing, had eased. Across the pitch-black fields, she gazed at the faint light leaking from the distant houses. A world far from the crowd. The whole way down the village road, she'd kept her face buried against his back, too afraid to look at anyone. She grabbed her sister-in-law's hand, and without even waiting for an answer, pressed on. Acha was fine. Liao Xiaomin quickly stepped in to smooth things over. Knowing she was easily embarrassed, Acha hurried to change the subject. Old man, he's fine. The word old. He just wouldn't come out of his mouth. He's their old he. Acha reached out and pinched her puffed-up cheek. She stomped her feet in a huff, yelling that she'd never speak to him again. His brother doesn't know how to bathe himself. He'd fenced off a corner of the yard with a tall barrier just for this. Acha drew the water and without any hesitation, stripped down in a few quick moves. By the time Acha had finished washing, she hadn't even taken off her clothes. She took a deep whiff, her eyes lighting up. But the old man was still nowhere to be found. Acha grabbed a torch and headed out again. Acha was tracking the red dot on his radar when someone blocked his path. He'd waited for a chance and clocked him from behind with a stick, turning a perfectly healthy man into a simpleton. Acha swung the hatchet, bringing it straight down at his head. He dodged to the side just in time, the blade grazing his arm. Lucky for him, his clothes were thick, so it didn't cut into flesh. On the radar, there were several more red dots nearby. The blood debt would be settled another day. According to Xia, the old man had headed toward the village square. The old man lay on the ground as if asleep. Without a word, Acha hoisted him onto his back and hurried home. The old man was 6 feet tall, yet thin as a bamboo pole, probably under 120 pounds. The human heart is harder to navigate than a mountain road. By the time Acha got home, it was already 9, and his wife rushed out in a panic. For a moment, Acha was not careful. Acha laid the old man down on the Kang bed and clumsily tended to his wound. Acha needed to find an excuse to cure this idiot condition soon. He'd taken a hard blow to the head and passed out. The first thing on his mind when he woke up was him. The old man shot him a surprised look, disbelief written all over his face. Acha gave a couple of dopey grins just to play along. The old man slapped the edge of the Kang bed, gritting his teeth. Son of a no idea which bastard clubbed him from behind. Acha would be good as new in a couple days. The crying actually warmed the old man's heart. Aya, old, he said, it's fine. By now, Acha had more or less pieced it together. Acha had lost count of how many times Acha had used his radar tonight. Next time, don't wait for him. Now get off the calm. Sister Hong and brought over a whole bunch of meat. The old man looked at him, suspicion filling his eyes. But what he cared about more was the fact that Acha had carried him home tonight. She stood by the door, not daring to come closer. Back at her parents' home, she'd always been the last to eat. A little greasy broth was enough to make her content. Acha picked up the biggest piece of venison and dropped it right into her bowl. Acha looked into her eyes and said slowly, word by word, "Eat, sweetheart." Acha picked up a piece of meat for her, the fattiest one. All Acha could see in their eyes was tenderness. She'd never been treated like this in her whole life. Acha could not bear to imagine what her life had been like before. When they go hungry together. She bit her lower lip, her shoulders trembling. She couldn't hold the tears back. They came down one after another. She was flustered, not knowing what to do with her hands. She had no idea how to repay all this kindness. She took a deep breath, trying to force the tears back down. But Acha blurted out. His little sister was somewhere between annoyed and amused, and she shot him a fierce glare. But then she remembered how Acha had teased her, the same way earlier that day, carrying her home on his back. Acha teased her a little more, and she landed a soft punch on him. She shot him a look before picking up her chopsticks. And somehow looking at him, she felt like laughing again, and getting a little mad too. This family, so lively, so full of warmth. The happiest meal Acha had ever eaten. After dinner, he called out to stop him. Acha slipped into the room in a flash, giving him no chance to speak. It was just like maybe Acha was not so dumb anymore. The moment Acha wrapped his arms around her from behind, her whole body went stiff like a startled little chick. She'd been trying to convince herself to accept him. Her body instinctively resisted, and small broken sounds escaped her throat. Acha still held her close, figuring Acha had let her get used to it slowly. The moment Acha hit the Kang bed, Acha was dead to the world. She was curled up in his arms, wearing nothing but a coarse cloth garment patched over and over beneath the blanket. A household with several people taking turns wearing a single set of clothes was nothing unusual. Acha was so absorbed in looking that Acha did not notice she'd woken up long ago. After a good while, she couldn't stand his burning gaze any longer, her face flushing red enough to bleed. Acha turned his head, only then realizing her whole face was blazing red. She buried her head into his chest with a smack, not making a sound, mortified beyond belief. When Acha finished, Acha suddenly remembered the stuff in his storage space. Then Acha took out a bowl of hot water. Then Acha pulled out the chunk of roe deer meat. Acha had snuck and cut yesterday, while Sister Honglian stepped away. Acha was pretty much certain. Now the storage space could keep things fresh. Acha packed everything up and came out, then hurried to put the flower pot back where it belonged once she went inside. Liao Xiaomin shoved a bunch of steamed cornbread buns into his hands, stuffed with roe deer meat and prickly ash sprouts. Acha hoisted the big iron shovel onto his shoulder, tucked the cornbread buns away, and headed out. Honestly, bro, he's not supposed to go out, but he goes anyway. Acha glanced back at the yard and something in his heart went soft. Acha walked down the village road with the shovel over his shoulder. Before heading up the mountain, Acha needed to get his hands on some gear. Acha could not come back empty-handed, and it wouldn't be right to ask Sister Honglian to lend him a gun. Her husband used to be a hunter, too. Just as Acha got close to the house, Acha heard a commotion inside. Let him take a look. Go ahead and scream. This place is out of the way and everyone's off at work. Widows have a hard time remarrying. The only ones willing to take them are either old men or those missing an arm or a leg. Get the hell out of here. Acha recognized the woman's intentions immediately and refused to let her flirtation drag him into another village scandal. Before he could finish, Acha slammed his foot into the door. A scream burst out from inside. Never in a million years would he have guessed it was him kicking down that door. The one who'd come to save her at the critical moment turned out to be this bull-headed idiot. She didn't call him by name. Sure enough, his face darkened, and Acha closed in on him step by step. He wasn't as tall as him and nowhere near as strong. The gossip around the dispute grew nastier, with people threatening to use Acha's former reputation as a fool against everyone connected to him. There was no way Acha would have told anyone. Acha and Acha have nothing to do with each other. Spread any more rumors, and Acha would go straight to the brigade leader and expose everything. He'd done plenty of stealing grain and skimming off the top. Worst case, they demote him to deputy leader, or bust him down to a regular field hand. By then, everyone will be saying, "Who? Xuanza, even an idiot can have her." The more he talked, the more worked up he got. Tears slid down from the corners of her eyes. She looked like she'd made up her mind about something. Just as he moved to slip past him, Acha stepped sideways and blocked him. Before he could finish, Acha grabbed both his hands and slammed him against the wall. Acha really wanted to kill him right here, right now. Too bad someone was watching. Acha swung his fist and started pounding him. There was an idiot standing on her side, and that was enough. Off in the distance, a few of the neighborhood aunties gathered at the doorway like cats, catching a whiff of fish. Just as she despaired, Acha spoke up for her. He tried to take advantage of Sister Shuin. The aunties outside the door erupted. So Lu Hermie's skipping work was just to come after Hu Shoen. They heard ages ago he had his eye on Shoen, but she wouldn't have him. Just a moment ago, they'd seen the fool passing by and had been talking trash about him behind his back. This idiot's actually turning on him. Could it be that this idiot's mind had recovered? He suddenly wrenched himself free, gaining a little distance, and shouted at the top of his lungs. Everybody don't believe a word this idiot says. But she seduced the fool, did shameful things with him, and Acha caught them in the act. So, she put the fool up to beating him. Her thing with Acha, that part was true. She never imagined that Lu Hermie just making stuff up off the top of his head would hit the nail right on the head. He was dragging her down into the mud with him. Acha, her mind went blank. Acha brought his fist down again. Lu wanted him to be his woman. Acha was walking by, heard it, and busted through the door to save him. Lu Hermie only started throwing dirt on them because Acha beat him up. With this many people watching, come on, beat him to death. Beat him to death and there won't be a soul left to testify against him. Acha Louis may be a lowlife, but Acha had got the guts to own what Acha did. If a single word of what Acha said is a lie, may lightning strike him down and may Acha die a horrible death. He was throwing all caution to the wind. Acha can swear an oath too. Once word about her and Acha got out. Acha, who widow Shawan, swear to heaven. Lu Dami walked straight into the inner room, gave his shoulder a light pat, and gestured for him to let go. Acha threw a few more punches. Even Lu Dami couldn't do anything with him. A couple more wouldn't make a difference. Director Acha had not been feeling well these past couple of days. The people outside the door listened, and one after another they cursed Lu Hermie for being scum. Acha he was at a loss for a second. Tints up. Acha saw it up on Big Timber Mountain Widow Shawan, and Acha both tinsed at the same time. Acha had had his radar on that day, and there wasn't a soul around. There was nothing going on between him and Acha. He'd hit the nail on the head. Lu Rasur said, making it sound convincing. So the 3 red dots on his radar that day were him, and the Shao brothers who Widow Shawan's breathing turned ragged. Acha went up to pick wild greens, then tell him where exactly on Big Timber Mountain. Pinned down by him, Louis turned his head somewhat sideways. She swept her eyes over the crowd, her voice dropping. If Acha hear anyone spreading gossip, Acha would haul her off to be denounced, Widow Shawan said, climbing down off the Kang bed and gripping Lu Dami's hand full of gratitude. That brother of his is just like that. Don't take it to heart. He knows he was wrong, she said softly, trying to talk him down. Acha did not budge an inch. His fists didn't stop and nobody could hold him back. But Lu Dami Acha just stood there not moving. Once Acha had made up his mind about something, even her father couldn't do a thing about it. Within a minute, the confrontation turned violent enough that everyone nearby stopped treating the dispute as harmless village gossip. The pain went straight to the bone. After a few seconds of silence, Lu Dami hurried to smooth things over. Acha climbed to his feet, and on his way up landed another kick. One that made him spit blood and knock 2 of his teeth crooked. The woman remembered the old grievance. Acha had once exposed her brother's shame, and that brother later beat him until his mind was damaged. He clutched his 2 teeth. The bridge of his nose bent out of shape. Lu Dami snorted coldly, exasperated with him. She dropped a stick on the ground, turned, and walked off. His face dark enough to wring water from. She was afraid Acha had actually beat Lu Hermie to death. And then there'd really be hell to pay. Acha pulled his gaze back and raised a hand to wipe away her tears. Seeing that Acha was fine, she went to push him away, but Acha caught her and pulled her in. And as Acha held her, that little spark started to rise. She never should have let things happen with him. She straightened her clothes and pulled the inner room's door shut. But the courtyard gate wouldn't close. Acha had bundled it up on the road so as not to give away that storage space of his. She looked at his dopey face, and something in her heart softened for no reason she could name. All these years, few people had ever been willing to help her, and those who did usually wanted something in return. In the end, the one who truly cared for her turned out to be a fool. Happy now? She had no idea what to do with him. and quickly clutched the meat to her chest. Acha pulled the door shut, letting her rest, and slipped into the storage room himself. A slab of meat for a bow. Acha slung the bow and arrows over his shoulder and walked to the gate, propping the fallen door panel back up. Right now, Acha needed to get up the mountain, bag some game, and put some better food on the table at home. The tracking radar switched on, and his head strained a little. Even a hunting rifle might not catch it. As for the Xiao Dashan brothers, Acha had been searching for them the whole time. Spot them deep in the woods. Dump the bodies. It was in the brush, not far off. It was a gorgeous male pheasant. A wild rooster, folks called it. There was a hen beside it, too. Acha crouched down and step by step closed in on soft feet. Acha took a deep breath, closed one eye, and lined up the arrowhead with that bright bundle of feathers a dozen meters away. Acha drew his little knife, cut a line across the rooster's neck, and bled it while it was still warm. The May woods were a brilliant glossy green, and whenever the wind swept by, it pressed cool against his face. A gray squirrel chittered among the branches like it was laughing at him. When Acha finally stumbled on some game, his aim wasn't sharp enough, and Acha let several get away. Not a bad haul for his first time hunting. Acha looked up at the sky around 4 o'clock. Time to head back, or his little sister and the others would start worrying again. After hours of searching, Acha had not caught so much as a shadow of them. Acha had barely gone half a mile when the corner of his mouth curled up. The second he saw him, his eyes lit up like he'd spotted his own father. Kept him waiting all damn day. He'd just been playing the wait while Acha played the seek. If it hadn't been for him yesterday, the brothers would have had their meat already, taking food out of a man's mouth. Acha narrowed his eyes and called up the radar. Within 100 meters, only him. Acha had been hoping Xiao Dashan would be around too. He was cocky as hell. Probably figured he had the moral high ground, and probably never once thought of him as a person. The next moment, his pupils shrank, and his grin froze. His skull rang instantly, and the scythe flew from his hand. Acha gripped the club one-handed, 4 feet long, thick as a wrist, gasping for air, and forcing down a hard swallow. A few seconds later, Acha crouched down, picked up the scythe, and checked under his nose. Still breathing. Acha dragged him to a hidden spot not far off the road. So Acha had been faking it all along. But Acha did not have time to waste. So Acha got right to it. He was still dazed out of it for a good while. The ones who knocked old he out cold. This cold-blooded thing in front of him was actually Height, the village idiot who acted dumb as posed every day. Acha narrowed his eyes, weighing whether he was telling the truth. He asked, testing the waters. The way he saw it, this was no big deal. Surely it wouldn't come down to killing. He figured Acha was just getting a little payback, so he forced out a laugh. Acha switched on the radar, dodged every red dot, and headed straight for the deeper, more remote parts of the mountains. That spot was even farther out than where Sister Honglian and Acha hunted. By the time Acha reached the edge of the village, it was nearly pitch dark, though Acha could still make things out. Acha had the big bow slung on his back and 2 pheasants in hand, scratching his head, grinning like a fool. Acha gave a couple of dopey grins in answer. Before she'd even finished, her hand was already reaching out to snatch his pheasants. Acha casually shoved the item aside, not even bothering to keep up the act anymore. On the way, some tried to lure him into their homes. To all of them, Acha gave the same answer. Sister Shoin gave him this bow. She poked her head out to look. Acha held up the little wild pheasant arrays. Just now she'd assumed Acha had come begging about that other thing. Acha had already given her half a pound of meat that morning, enough for 2 meals on her own. The urge to tease her flared up again, and seeing that no one was around, she finally brought her lips close. But Acha struck first, planting a big hard kiss on her, his little sister crouching, his wife standing, and old he's sitting there smoking. They weren't family bound to him by blood, and they had only been together a few days. But in his heart, they were familiar strangers. Don't call P old man. Acha could not be bothered to argue with his silly sister. But Acha had barely taken 2 steps when his head suddenly went hot. Acha stumbled, and his forehead slammed straight into the stone mill. Pai had no time to dwell on it. He helped him into the inner room to lie down and bandaged his wound. Thank goodness he still knows him. Honey, Acha called out to Liao Xiaoman. Acha nodded just enough to show he recognized the people around him, easing the family's fear that his head injury had worsened again. That's P, not old man. Acha shook his head and smiled a little. The father and daughter took turns firing questions at him, and Acha answered each one. Of course, he knows that. His little sister cut in. Acha looked at this bargain bin, little sister of his. He got them all right. Big brother's not dumb anymore. She couldn't even catch that Acha gotten it wrong. All three of them stared at him tense. Acha furrowed his brow, pretending to rack his brain. After a long while, Acha shook his head. Acha nodded with a smile. A little bit. Drawing on what memories Acha had, Acha vaguely recounted a few old stories. Patchy and fragmented. Impossible to tell true from false. Imagine if they bumped it a few more times. The corner of his mouth twitched. Acha glanced at old he, and he actually looked like he was seriously considering it. Acha breathed a sigh of relief. But the next moment, Acha's hurt right now. They can wait till he's healed up before bumping him again. Once Acha was better, they just pick right back up with the head bumping. She almost wished Acha had knocked his head against the millstone a few more times and turned back into the idiot Acha used to be. The wife, the old man, traded grain for, Acha said. One word at a time. She asked, treading carefully, though beneath it all, there was a flicker of hope she hardly dared to feel. The food had gone cold, and no one had picked up their chopsticks. Hay and Shai crowded around him, pelting him with questions, and even dragged out the story of his hunting. Old Gatsy, bring out the portion they set aside, too. 6 or 7 pounds of roe deer meat. With so little salt in the house, they could only cook it in 5 servings. The family still had pheasant for the next meal, and Acha's improving hunting skill meant tomorrow's food no longer looked hopeless. Acha picked out a piece that was half lean, half fat, and put it in Liao Xiaomin's bowl. She froze and looked up at him. She let out a dazed little, lowered her head and dug into her rice, but her eyes had gone red. Today, Acha was covered in blood and grime. Acha draped an arm over her shoulder and steered her toward the space between the fences. Acha teased her a couple of times, and she turned as red-hot as a live coal. He cleared his throat from outside. Just say the word and there's a baby. Acha smiled and said nothing. Earn a few work points. Acha was still Acha the fool. Grandpa, he caught on right away. If the people who beaten him found out Acha was not slow anymore, they'd surely cook up something behind his back. Acha immediately crouched down and started fighting Shia for a feather. The firelight drew closer, and Acha recognized them. He stood up, holding the plucked pheasant. Let's just talk out here in the yard. The brigade leader's eyes settled on that pheasant. He pointed to the big bow in the corner. The three of them leaned in for a look. Acha would keep it short, the brigade leader said. Shower Han went up the mountain and still hasn't come back. Grandpa, he shook his head. Out of nowhere, for no reason at all, jumped them. Acha thought he did something to his brother up on that mountain and stole his game too. Xiao Dashing got worked up too. His Achao's even got himself a wife. Xiao Dashan choked on that. He was in fact a bachelor. The brigade leader stepped between them. Given how Ashao's head usually works, bleeding a kill. It's that Xiao Heir's Han still hasn't come back, and they were afraid he's run into some kind of trouble. Grandpa, he looked over at him playing with the chicken feathers. Grandpa, he shut it down right then and there. He'd never do anything sneaky or thieving, even if he really had raised a hand. Chief, everyone in East Village knows what kind of boy his son is. The chief looked at Zhao Dashan. They traded wild parsnips to hone him in for it, and she agreed. Lu Hermy, who'd been silent this whole time, suddenly spoke up, but his eyes were restless. Darting toward the yard, toward the bamboo gate that Liao Xiaomin had just walked out of. Acha saw right through him in an instant. She shot him a scolding look and lowered her head. Acha filed that look away in his mind. Old he have a Chiao come over so they can ask him directly, the chief said. If this had been earlier that morning, he'd have died before letting anyone question his son. Old he played along, tugging at him for a good while, before finally managing to invite him out. Sister Shuin gave it to him. Acha ran over to grab the bow and clumsily drew it back. The beating he'd taken that morning was still fresh in his mind. Acha made a back and forth, slashing motion across the pheasant's neck. Looked like neither he nor Lumi could be allowed to stick around, the way he just looked at his wife and his sister. After a long round of questioning, they finally confirmed that Acha had only seen villagers digging wild greens and nobody else. Xiao Dashan refused to give up. He pointed at him, his presence bearing down hard. The chief stepped in to smooth things over. Acha said it when they came here. Everything comes down to evidence. Xiao Dashan apologized to old he. Go apologize to his son. Finally, he stamped his foot and ran off. That was just how old he was. After everyone left, he asked him in a low voice. The door shut, and Acha climbed onto the kang bed and wrapped his arms around her waist from behind. The tips of her ears turned red in an instant. Before she could finish, Acha cut her words off. Liao Xiaomin's face flushed as she pushed him back with some force. Acha reached out, and she quickly stopped him. Acha had held back for 2 days, and now this monkey wrench had thrown itself into the works. Nobody in her family had ever taught her about these things, and she'd only been in East Village for 2 or 3 days. Acha pulled his hand back and tucked the blanket in around her. She nestled into his arms, no longer trembling, like she had the past 2 days. Acha waited until her breathing evened out, then quietly opened his eyes and gently pushed her away. Acha grabbed his gear and slipped out of the yard. The tracking radar lit up in his mind, pointing straight at Lu Hermie's house. Take a look at all these injuries Acha had got. Last month, Acha tricked him into peeping on someone taking a bath, and he actually went dumb as ever. The woman was named Wang Qin. Back then, it was him who caught the two of them in the act, which was why Louis from behind him beat him stupid in a sneak attack. Acha felt his way along the road to the home of Tian Guang, Wang Qin's husband. As it happened, Acha had paper and pen on him. After pounding on the door, Acha slipped away into the shadows. A middle-aged man, somewhere around 40, poked his head out with a jacket draped over his shoulders. He picked them up, and the more he read, the tighter his brow knotted. Acha followed behind, watching him make his way step by step toward Lu Hermie's yard. Gritting his teeth, Tian Guang slowly drew the blade from behind his back, fire burning in his eyes. "Brother Tong, it's a misunderstanding." Wang Qin threw herself at him. "Brother," Tacha knew Acha was wrong. In a dozen seconds, Lu Hermie fell silent, red and white bone glinting through. "Ah, Guayong." Acha was wrong. Through a crack in the wall, Acha watched him stare blankly at the two corpses on the floor and at his own crimson hands. He repeated it over and over, then suddenly bolted out the door and ran. From beginning to end, Acha stayed hidden in the shadows. A thorn in his heart, pulled clean, using Tisan Guidong's hand to get rid of Lu Hermie and his wife. The next day, the body was found by villagers. The police showed up, examined the scene, and questioned the people of East Village. The wanted notice went up that same day. Some old man said he'd seen Tian heading toward town, had even given him a lift partway. His father suddenly called out to him and hurried over. Acha had his big bow slung across his back and a sack in hand about to head up the mountain. These past 2 days, he'd absolutely refused to let him go out. Acha scratched his head, gave a foolish grin, and said nothing. The night before last, he hadn't stopped him because he'd assumed Acha had the runs. Acha played along with a silly grin. He urged again and again. She wanted to do her part for this family, even if it just meant digging up some wild vegetables. Looking at his wife and his sister, warmth spread through his chest. Acha put one hand on his sister and one on his wife and gently nudged them back into the yard. She probably never expected a half-simpleton to understand about a woman's monthly cycle. His little sister opened her mouth to speak, but Acha cut him off. She kept staring at him like she'd noticed something different about her big brother today. The two of them, his wife and his sister, stood at the courtyard gate, watching him go. A string of bird calls cut through his thoughts. The more Acha listened, the more familiar it sounded. Acha pulled a slingshot out of his storage space. Acha had grabbed it along with the bow and arrows that day, over at Widow Xuan's place, just on impulse. These past couple days at home, Acha had rolled up a good stash of clay pellets to use as ammo. Acha drew the slingshot back full, a few flying off, but most of them just stayed put. That's why they've got another nickname, the roe deer of the bird world. Acha chased and shot his way along. In an hour, Acha had 8 of them, each about half a pound. Acha switched on prey tracking on the radar. Roe deer or wild boar. If Acha could take a shot at it. 2 roe deer were drinking with their heads down, taking a sip, and then lifting up to look around. Acha drew his big bow, took a deep breath, pulled the string, and took aim. A deer with an arrow in it couldn't run fast, and Acha could still see it in the distance. Save his energy. 50 or 60 meters into the chase, it had already collapsed, barely breathing. The hide his first time, and Acha was all thumbs. But Acha was extra careful with the skinning. The small one was moving fast, headed straight for him. Acha rire of blood, and that dog had probably marked him as prey. Acha bolted, found a good climbing tree, and scrambled up in a few quick moves. Even if Acha did kill the dog, there'd be people right behind it. A splash of green at the base of the tree caught his eye. Acha looked harder and his eyes lit up. A black dog was barking up at him. The two of them stood there panting, staring up at him. Acha stayed quiet and on guard, ready to summon his great bow at any moment. Xiao Deshan spoke first, jabbing a finger at him and cursing. Old Jang, on the other hand, was surprised. This was the mouth of the deep mountains. Acha had deliberately shown them off after spotting people. This idiot must have stolen M from his brother. Xiao Daxin glared at the grouse on his waist, eyes full of envy. Bad guy taking his stuff. Acha quietly slipped the slingshot behind his back, ready to summon a bow and arrows at any moment. At this range, Acha was 90% sure. Acha could take down Hunter Jiang first. The longer Acha watched, the more nervous Acha got. Sure, Acha had the odds, but the risk was real. Hunter Jiang cut him off with a shout. Acha, old Jiang, don't stoop to petty theft. Acha was covered in blood, but Acha was not hurt. The moment Acha hit the ground, Xiao dashed and landed a kick on him. Acha quickly snapped off the ginseng stem and stashed it in his storage space. By the time Acha got up, Xiao Daxin had already shrunk behind Hunter Jiang. Acha stared at him blankly, but inside Acha was scheming. Hunter Jiang asked, gesturing as he spoke, afraid Acha would not understand. All that was left at the scene was a pool of blood, a few wolf paw prints, and a drag mark. Acha had taken too long dressing the kill, and the smell of blood had drawn other beasts long ago. Hunter Jiang asked again, and Acha just said Acha was passing through. Ow, stick with him for now, and they would head back together. He was worried Acha had run into a wild animal or lose his way. Before Hunter Jiang could say anything, Acha scratched his head. Acha remembered back when Sha Wei got sick. It was Hunter Jiang who found the medicine that cured his little sister. Down the road, Acha might need his help again. Acha had left before dawn, and by the time Acha got home, it was past 1 o'clock in the afternoon. They figured it was probably wild vegetables. And the sack looked half empty anyway. The family had assumed Acha would not be back till nightfall. They hadn't expected him this early. When he'd knocked off work at noon, he'd run into Sister Honglian, and she'd told him Acha never came to find her at all. He opened the sack, and his eyes went wide as saucers. His sister and sister-in-law crowded in too, and the whole room erupted. He was so excited she stomped her feet. Acha just smiled as good as a yes. Sell it. Buy some fabric for his wife and his sister. Xia Wei threw herself onto his back, giggling away. It was that whenever Acha came into something good, she was the first person Acha thought of. Back when her sister had swapped places with her, marrying her off to a simpleton, she'd thought it was the nightmare of her life. Truth was, old? He wasn't old at all. Acha had got things to do, so Acha won't be working today. Acha would make up the work points later by paying for them. He planned to head into town after the meal and sell them to the supply co-op. His little sister had just answered when a woman's voice came from outside. A sharp-faced woman walked in, followed by a young, pretty girl. Oh, so it's his in-laws. His paw forced out a smile. Liao took a few quick steps forward, crouched down, and picked one up, her eyes gleaming. In-laws? Acha did not know the first thing about hunting. His son caught all of these. At the mention of his son, his paw's face lit up with pride. In-laws. She let it slip before she could catch herself. His little sister puffed out her cheeks, snatched away the flying dragon, and shielded it behind her back. Liao had just risen to her feet when his paw hurriedly cleared his throat twice. He kept his temper in check and stayed polite. Liao shot Liao Xiaomin a vicious glare. The latter kept her head down, clenched her fists, and looked thoroughly ill at ease. After all, old he was the only elder in the household, and he wanted to set an example. As it happens, Xiaofeng and Acha are starving. Mother and daughter were hungry, so they figured they'd make do with a meal at the high household. She'd assumed they'd be lucky to get some cornbread buns to gnaw on. She had to walk away with some benefits. Just as they were about to eat, old he didn't look too happy either. Liao Xiaomin quickly muttered, "Okay," and turned to fetch the bowls and chopsticks from the outer room. Watching his wife's meek, hunched-over figure, that fire in him slowly started to burn. But in this household, from now on, nobody would ever dare make her bow her head like that again. His little sister pouted, her face full of resentment. All right, let's go eat." Old he called out. The steamed corn buns and wild greens had just been set on the table when Granny Liao glanced over. He needed to get the hazel grouse over to the supply co-op fast, or they wouldn't be fresh anymore. After all, Acha was the one who'd caught the game, and it wasn't just him who was unwilling. Granny Liao was even less so. In-law. Granny Lo hit the nail right on the head, selling them to help with household expenses. Acha won't bother with the squirrels. Granny Liao said it like she was fully in the right, and Acha was not even trying to take advantage. Acha heard a long time ago that hazel grouse makes the freshest soup, and Acha had never had the chance to try it. Acha went around borrowing money and Acha swallowed it. In-law, his Acha worked hard to catch these hazel grouse. Granny Liao acted like she hadn't heard 2 gray squirrels is more than fair. She almost let that word slip out again. If old he hadn't been holding her back, she'd have started cursing long ago. Granny Liao's eyes bored into his face. Acha stared back at her, expression grim. The thought flipped, and Granny Liao shot Liao Xiaomin a vicious glare. This useless girl had actually gotten fatter, eating this well and never thinking to bring anything back to her mother's house. Ungrateful wretch. Acha, that's not what Acha meant. Granny Liao's temper flared too. His son got better these past couple days. Rage shot straight to the top of her head. She stared at Liao Xiaomin, angrier by the second. Acha caught that hand in a single grip, her knuckles aching in his palm. Acha fixed his eyes on her, cold as snow. Acha dragged her toward the door, and at the gate, Acha flung his arm and threw her out. The two of them scrambled away on all fours. Acha realized the older man had misjudged the people involved because his father-in-law had given him a deliberately misleading version of events. But those words broke something loose, and without caring who might be nearby, she buried her face against his chest and sobbed. This time, Acha did not tell her. She looked ugly when she cried. Acha carried her to the kang bed and let her rest. After lunch, his old man hoisted a burlap sack of hazel grouse over his shoulder, his brow knotted tight. Before he could finish, Acha was already gone in a flash. The more he thought about it, the more sensible it seemed. The door to the inner room creaked open. Shu and poked her head out to look, and Acha slipped inside in that instant. Before she could finish, Acha had already kissed her. Her soft fists pounded against his chest, then gradually loosened, pressing flat against him as her eyelids slowly drifted shut. Her face was flushed all over, and she gave him a scolding little swat. At the start of the year, the state had handed out cloth coupons across the board. Acha figured she still had sent some. As Shasis, she let out a startled cry, as her body lifted into the air, her hands instinctively hooking around his neck. Acha would get them himself, being carried like a child by a man 4 years younger than her. She was utterly helpless against him. She glared at him, her face full of playful reproach. A soft little fist landed on him. Acha turned around and kissed her again. Acha let go of her and picked up the 3 sand partridges Acha had set down by the door when Acha came in, bagged them on the way back down the mountain. Acha could not win, so Acha took 2 back. The slingshot was a gift from her, so it only made sense as to repay her with food. It was more than just casual. He'd been waiting by the roadside for over an hour. They may be poor, but they do not steal. Acha froze, surprised he reacted so strongly. A big sis gave them to him. Had to be some young widow. Acha needed to thank her properly. Acha hopped onto the borrowed 28-in bike and brushed him off. That whole coaxing routine only works on someone who's actually slow. He pedaled the whole way, asking the whole way. Acha did not let a single word slip. The afternoon had none of the morning market's bustle. He led him straight to the supply co-op. Acha still had a roe deer to sell. He just hoisted the bike onto his shoulder and carried it inside. Acha followed close behind, seeing the inside of a supply co-op for the first time. The air smelled of kerosene and dried vegetables. Comrade, Acha had got some fresh-killed hazel grouse here. He got straight to the point. Hazel grouse was top-tier game. Just as the clerk was about to speak, he jumped in. Comrade, his son's picked up some real hunting skills lately. He rambled on, but the point was clear. Still, results were what mattered, and these two were total strangers. Plenty of places didn't offer bonus coupons at all. Hazel grouse $210 each came to $14 total for these times. Acha looked at the fabric coupons in his hand and his heart sank. An adult's autumn shirt took 3 or 4 feet of cloth. That 4-leaf ginseng Acha had not even dug up yet was worth $300 at the very least. The clerk shot him a glance and offered just one word. The clerk followed his gaze, and the corner of his mouth curled up. Acha snapped his eyes back, so fast they nearly popped out of his head. That woman was an assassin from behind. That cheap POW woman really was homely. Hides depend on quality and size. Meats by weight per pounds. Skill was the only thing that really counted. Before long, he had gathered everything. He wanted to buy the good cigarettes too, but those needed ration coupons. He pulled out the list he'd written earlier and looked it over. Everything except the cigarettes he wanted to smoke and the liquor he wanted to drink. After buying all this with these 10-odd yuan, how much would be left anyway, comrade? That comes to 12 yuan. 3 ma, 2 fun. 2 yuan, 3 ma, 8 fun. Oldie took the money, then paused. Add a pack of handshake cigarettes. Acha could see the longing and reluctance in his eyes. Walking out of the supply co-op, loaded with bags big and small. Seems like no matter the era, spending money really does heal the soul. But Acha suddenly called out. "What is it, Acha? Old man, let's go check out that place over there." The two of them stood at the entrance of the state-run restaurant when Acha suddenly clutched his stomach and said it hurt. Acha poked his head out to make sure no one was around, then hoisted it up and carried it into the supply co-op. Without a word, Acha set the roe deer meat on the scale. He suddenly perked up with interest. "Name's Luing." Acha looked at the roe deer and got straight to the point. Acha said it all in one breath, leaving him stunned. Well, Acha did not need it all at once. Acha had got a big family to feed. For a first-time deal, this was more than fair. Acha stepped up to the counter and spent every last cent. Hardly anyone came around to sell it. Maybe a handful of people a year. Maybe Acha would get lucky and stumble across some one day. He figured Acha was joking. Acha just stepped away to take a dump, and Acha came back with more stuff than he tied to the cart. He knew full well Acha did not have a single cent on him. If Acha did not steal it, Acha stole it or found it. Acha tied the scavenged luggage rack onto the cart, badly on purpose, letting he step in and finish the practical work properly. Sure enough, some folks were looking their way. Then let's get moving fast. He was no saint either. The two of them pushed the cart and took off like the wind. On the road, he hummed an old tune as they crossed hills and ridges. She'd surely jump up and shout, he's the coolest." The more he thought about it, the happier he got. He clapped him hard on the shoulder. So, it turns out Acha worked himself to the bone. And it ends up being someone else's credit. Sure, his wife isn't exactly someone else, but Acha was the one who earned it. A villager with farm tools slung over his back stared at them in shock like he'd just gotten off work. A whole crowd gathered around them, looking them up and down, practically itching to snatch the stuff right out of their hands. The taste of being envied like this was addictive. If Acha had not nudged him along a few times, he wouldn't have wanted to move an inch. Everybody envied him, for landing such a pretty wife. She'd just gotten off work too. He had always been good to the two of them. His mom, she's sick, but it's nothing. Then Acha would come by tomorrow to check on her. Sister Honglian was about to leave when Acha called out to her. She stared at that clip for a long moment, before finally heading home. It's already dark out. Xiaowei crouched in the yard, chin cupped in her hands, gazing at the gate. Inside thus, Liao Xiaomin bit back a smile. His little sister bolted outside like a bounding rabbit. "Ah, there's his good girl." He shoved him aside with her hip and ran around back to start pushing the cart. Seeing the three of them chatting and laughing, Liao Xiaomin's lips curved up too. She sat down what she was doing, wiped her hands on her waist, and fetched that long dried-out kerosene lamp. As Acha took the lamp, his fingertips brushed against her hand on the sly. Crowed, thrilled with his kerosene-smeared hand, Acha gave her cheek a hard pinch. His brother smeared kerosene on his face. "Oh yeah, nice and shiny old." He waved the can in his hand. Acha reached out, deliberately taking his sweet time. His little sister snatched it and hugged it to her chest. And it was a good while before she could pull herself together. It was he and him spoiling her rotten. The wild greens were what his wife and sister had spent half the day out foraging, just to scrape together for one meal. The wild greens out there had long since been picked clean. With that, Acha headed back to his room. Xia had already slipped inside to check herself in the mirror. Behind him, he held up those two cartons, turning them over and over, grumbling. Xiaomin stared at herself in the mirror like she was looking at a stranger. Acha gently wrapped his arms around her from behind. Then Acha had looked like a little kid. When she opened her eyes again, there was something new sitting on top of her head. It was the first gift she'd ever received in her life. So, of course, Acha had to ruin it. She spun around and threw a soft little punch at him. Acha had slipped a piece of candy into her mouth. In that moment, her heart was even sweeter than the candy on her tongue. Acha had blown out the lamp and scooped her up onto the kang bed. She leaned into his arms like she'd already gotten used to it. They're the ones who went too far. Let him check just how much his wife's hurting. Everything she'd wanted to say got all tangled up by him, leaving her caught between laughter and tears. The next day at dawn, 4:30 in the morning, Acha played dead. Wouldn't answer no matter what. If P sees Acha still haven't made breakfast this late, he'll say Acha was lazy. Acha had no choice but to let go like a kitten, breaking free from its cage. She hopped off the bed and got dressed. Before she left, Acha teased his wife once more. Liao Xiaomin answered only with a shy smile before returning to the day's chores. After his paw left, Xia bounced out. A new toothbrush in her left hand, a little dipper in her right. She talked more than she had the past few days. She hadn't done much field work, so she learned the delicate work well. Acha had specifically asked his wife to make these steamed buns. Said they should mix in other grains to stretch their food supply. But Acha insisted, so she went along with it. The radar in his mind swept the area. Widow Xuan wasn't home. She had a share in the money from selling that roe deer, since the hunting gear belonged to her family after all. Acha like women, and Acha can't shake the habit. Acha pushed the bicycle up to Uncle Wong's front gate. Acha set it up on its stand. But call him not a fool. Well, Acha had lost that dopey air Acha used to have. Acha put both hands up on top of his head and made a couple of gestures, but didn't smile. This kid wasn't a fool, just not quite all there in the head. When Acha said nothing, he explained it himself. Two of the men from the outer village grew impatient. The medicinal potency is nothing compared to late autumn. It's not like they were eating it ourselves. Someone heading up the mountain for the very first time. As the old saying goes, beginners have the strongest luck, and they're more likely to. He'd be perfect, but someone had doubts. After all, he was a half-wit. Toss him a little and send him on his way. Acha knew exactly what they were scheming. Only after everyone had left did Acha set down the antler, the red cord, and the tally sticks used for calling out to the mountain. Truth was, the antler was the most useless of the bunch. Not nearly as effective as the deerbone pick. But Acha only wanted to borrow something that wouldn't draw attention. He'd even heard old. He had borrowed a cart yesterday. Acha took it and studied it closely, putting on a look of sudden realization. Acha had almost certainly never seen one. A rookie's whole draw is being loaded with luck. Acha lifted the antler, meaning Acha had to take it. Learning a trick or two was fine, but right now Acha was more interested in hunting. As for digging, ginseng, Acha could do it on the side while hunting. Acha heard the half-wit and his old man came back from town last night with a whole cartload of stuff. She repeated what she'd heard, embellishing it plenty. Acha would have to sound out old he later. The way he saw it, a clueless half-wit digging ginseng was pure waste. Tomorrow, Acha would have to head up the mountain too. That four-leaf ginseng plant, Acha was confident no one had found it. That was what Uncle Wong cornered old he with at noon. The two families were on friendly terms, so old he didn't hide it completely. But he downplayed it. It's his daughter-in-law bringing good fortune to them. He's old. He glanced at his daughter-in-law and his sister sit inside the house, looking thoroughly content. Even when they'd found him a wife, the boy hadn't dared bring her home to meet the family. If Chow really digs up some mountain ginseng, remember to let him know. On his way out, Uncle Wong added one more thing. Sure enough, old. He asked him about it later. Acha knew exactly what it meant. Acha could always sneak around it. But Acha did not want to owe him that kind of favor. Acha shook his head again. Chiao just wants to try his luck. Acha still shook his head. It wasn't that Acha loved working alone. Acha just hadn't found the right partner. Through the whole conversation, Acha did not smile once. The way he saw it, his talking plainly meant the fool's sickness was slowly getting better. Then Acha dug up some wooden sticks and bamboo and set to work making tools for digging ginseng. Hunting had taught him that early the next morning. But then she figured Acha already did more than enough for this family. So she swallowed the words and decided she'd go get it herself later. Acha did not hide his gear. One of the women gave him a smile that wasn't really a smile. Even Hunter Jiang doesn't dare claim. He brings back a haul every time. Let them talk all they want as long as they don't mess with his family. Passing by Widow Xuan's place, Acha meant to check whether she was home. Acha was not one to stick his nose in other people's business. So Acha headed straight for Dama Mountain. Acha was just breaking off a stalk of wild lettuce when a familiar voice suddenly rang out behind him. Real professionals, Uncle Wong? Acha answered politely. If he can find any, then from now on, Acha would pretend Acha did not even see ginseng when it's right in front of him. Deep down, he had a nagging feeling he just couldn't shake. Stop picking vegetables and come along with them, he urged again. Hunting, gathering wild vegetables, and now going after ginseng too. He might look like a simpleton, but the man really could bring down game. He wants to dig up a ginseng root all by himself. They laughed, but Uncle Wong froze for a second. That was 2 days' wages. Just 3 words came out of his mouth. The crowd instantly erupted with jeers. Truth was, Uncle Wong didn't believe it either. It's just that gut instinct of his had never once been wrong. The backs of the group of men faded into the distance. and their gossip about him drifted back on the wind. Acha pulled his thoughts back and stopped digging for wild greens. If his luck went sour today, and somebody dug up that four-leaf ginseng before him, Acha would be out big time. The boss's crew hadn't headed anywhere near that patch of four-leaf ginseng. Following the mountain rules, Acha tied red cord around the marked tree, then used a bamboo pick to loosen soil around the precious ginseng. Acha gently probed the bamboo pick into the soil and scraped bit by bit. The price gets cut in half. 20 minutes in, Acha reached the root. If only Acha could dig out 7 or 8 O. 7 O's makes ginseng, 8 O makes treasure, and a root fine as a hair snapped off. Acha scraped at the dirt even more gently, brushing with the soft bristle brush now and then, never once nicking the root. A man-shaped ginseng root lay quietly before him. Acha stopped what Acha was doing and immediately switched on prey tracking, watching for danger. The whole way here, Acha had been sweeping the radar now and then, just to steer clear of trouble. Acha was so worn out, his hands were shaking. Acha grabbed his bow, slipped into the shadows, and kept his eyes locked on that mud pit. And in the end, that left him with no real confidence. Had to make some money, get himself a gun, hauling a wild boar on his shoulder that had to be over 200 pounds. He set the boar down on a patch of grass, trying to keep it out of the mud. Acha wanted to trade some meat for a bite to eat. Acha stepped out of the shadows. The one digging ginseng was him. He pointed a finger at the root, his voice wavering. Last time when Acha had taken down that flying dragon, that was enough to shock him. He looked at the bow in his hand, silent for a long moment. He just tossed the gun straight over to him. Acha let his guard down and pulled 2 white flower buns out of his pack. Acha had to save some for himself, too. He took a drag on his cigarette and exhaled a long stream of smoke back among the living. While he ate, Acha set the gun within reach and finished the last steps of preparing the ginseng route. Acha stuffed the ginseng into the burlap sack and sat down across from him. He talked just to pass the time. Otherwise, Acha would have had a hell of a time, just scourging up some wild greens. He rambled on for a good while, and a lot of the exhaustion drained from his face. The sun was sinking to the west, casting long shadows. His gut told him this man meant no harm. Acha carried his gun for him, and they ran a thick wooden pole through the boar, hauling it between them, one in front and one behind. Hunter Jung had scored again, and the fool actually got a cut. His 2 sons were married, plus 4 grandchildren and his wife. The 3 able-bodied men were out working, leaving the 2 daughters-in-law at home watching the kids. The 2 of them carried the boar into the yard. Give him a hand in a minute. He set up the big iron pot and started a fire in the yard. His shoulders were it was crushing down on him, aching. A pretty young woman with delicate features was waving him over, motioning for him to come inside. Another young wife was helping Hunter Jung tend the fire, and 2 half-grown kids were asleep in the back room. Inside, it was just him and this young woman. A warm cornbread bun got shoved right into his mouth. His eyes went wide and Acha froze on the spot. The second Acha got loose, Acha sprang backward, staring at her with his heart still pounding. She was still holding up the bun, closing in on him step by step. The memories in his head finally connected. The last time was just 5 days ago. This was not something Acha could just eat. Acha swallowed hard and wiped his mouth. That woman, she was something else. Achow, come help wash this. Acha could never ever let the Jang family find out. 2 or 3 punches and they'd knock him flat. He had already stripped the hide, which could be sold or made into hide boots. Hunter Jean cut off 30 pounds for him. It's not like Acha did not put in the work, but asking for more on his own. Acha hoisted the load onto his back and slipped away, and her heart skipped a beat. That boy, he's sharp as a tack now. She stood frozen in place. Now that was rare. 30 pounds of pork weighed heavy in his hands. On the road, Acha ran into villagers heading home after a day's work. They took off running, terrified of being a step too late, and missing out on the fatty cuts. When Acha got home, Pennsylvania, he was just coming out from the back room. Old Jen's not a bad guy. Acha set the meat down and peered into the house. The kerosene lamp wasn't lit. He grabbed the lantern, ready to head out. Acha would go, but sneak attack. To this day, Acha still don't know who knocked old he out. Every so often, Acha had fire up the tracking radar. Acha was about ready to fall apart from running himself. The lantern lit up their faces, and both of them broke into grins at the same time, flashing white teeth. Acha Liao Xiaomin swallowed her words and dropped her head. She'd expected him to praise her here. Sister, give him the firewood. She'd never done hard labor before. She'd become a burden to him again. Her heart was full of self-blame. Brother, they dug up tons of wild greens, and Acha even saw a big old bird. Sometimes Acha thought the more weight a person carries alone, it doesn't necessarily mean they're capable. Acha went to chop firewood with Sis. Acha just wanted to take some of the load off the family. Liao Xiaomin kept her head down, her voice so faint it was barely audible. Acha hurled that big bundle of firewood down in the courtyard. She grabbed onto it like a lifeline. She reached out and Acha caught a flash of bright red on her fingertip. Jarring against her skin, the cut wasn't deep, and the blood had already dried. Acha brushed the wood chips off her back and led her into the inner room. Acha should start on dinner. Don't think Acha can cook. Acha, have some hot tea. The moment Acha turned around, she shot up. In her world, the He family's housework was hers to do, and Acha knew exactly what was going through her mind. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work, but she was in bad shape. Acha leaned in close to her ear and murmured something. Her cheeks flushed instantly, and she ducked her head, working in silence. Acha stopped the young woman from doing the heaviest chopping, warning that one bad swing could injure her back before the work was finished. Acha could not resist pinching her cheek, giving it a good shake, skin and all. His little sister didn't make a sound, just rolled her eyes and glared at him. This meat doesn't have any of that GI taste. For pairs of chopsticks moved at once. Only Liao Xiaomin hesitated. She suddenly started shoveling the meat from her bowl, cramming huge mouthfuls in one after another. He was probably afraid Acha had object. Brown sugar. At lunch, Acha had heard that Sister Honglian's mother had gotten hurt at work. Then, Acha reached into the burlap sack and pulled out a piece of bark. Peeling back the moss, Acha revealed an old wild ginseng root shaped like a little man. Luck, Acha said with a slight nod. He roared with laughter, then turned and hollered toward the outer room. The corner of his mouth twitched. So, all the credit was going to his wife. The old man grabbed the lantern and went bounding out the door, hopping around like an overgrown kid. She stood on her tiptoes and held her hand out at an angle, measuring over both their heads. Acha clapped the hand down on her head and pressed her right back down a few inches. Acha rubbed his hands together, grinning like a devil. Liao Xiaomin shrank down under the covers, her neck stiffening, a little scared. Acha should not have come home so late. Shouldn't have dragged his sister-in-law out to chop firewood. She lifted her wet gaze to him, both hands clutching desperately at the front of his shirt. From now on, Acha would definitely do the housework properly. In that moment, Acha finally understood just how fragile she was, how lonely she felt, how helpless, how utterly without any sense of security. Acha pulled her softly into his arms and held her tight. The instant those words left his mouth, her breath caught like it had been cut off, and she went rigid for 2 seconds. She'd already cried herself into a splotchy little mess. Over and over, Acha wiped the corners of her eyes. Acha cursed himself for his loose mouth. She was sunk deep in trying to please and begging to be forgiven. Not a single word of comfort was getting through. It took her a long, broken while to get that whole sentence out. From now on, Acha would do better. The more she said it, the more his heart ached. Before she could react, Acha pulled off his shirt and rolled over, baring his solid back. She sat there on the Kang bed, frozen, not daring to climb on top of him. After a while, Acha told her to stop, then turned and had her lie down instead, switching so Acha could rub hers. This wasn't a punishment at all. Instead of punishing Liao Xiaomin, Acha turned the moment into quiet affection, making it clear she had nothing to fear from him. Acha kept kneading, and the timing felt just about right. She turned her head, her eyes full of a stubborn need to understand. Then Acha pulled back and went on rubbing her shoulders. Acha let out a soft laugh. She buried her face in the pillow, her shoulders trembling faintly. So it turned out someone worried about her too. Acha leaned close to her ear again. Before she could answer, Acha got there first. Acha made as if to get up, and she grabbed him at once, her voice trembling with panic. She threw her arms around him, holding on for dear life. Terrified Acha had actually leave. Before Acha had even finished, she'd already kissed him. The mood was just fine. The night was still long, and they whispered to each other under the covers. Those thoughts of hers frozen stiff, quietly cracked open with every word Acha spoke. Acha thought Acha had misheard this woman. Acha stepped outside and saw Widow Shawan, chatting and laughing with his sister and his wife, apparently talking about needlework. Acha always felt there was a barb hidden in her words, but Acha could not figure out what she'd come for so early in the day. His little sister praised her, then switched gears. The corner of his mouth twitched. Wouldn't this be too much trouble for a co-widow? Shawan brushed aside the strands of hair falling over her eyes and stole a glance at him. Liao Xiaomin wrapped up 4 white steamed buns and handed them to him. This wife of his affection for her wasn't wasted either. Acha made up his mind that Acha had given his all today. Widow Shawan pressed her lips together and turned her face away. Acha can dig up some wild vegetables with sis. Acha quickly waved them off. Shuan and Acha headed up the mountain. She'd taken the day off work just to find him. Ow, the stuff in the big jar. That day when she'd gone home to cook, she'd found a big bundle of daily necessities in the jar. She didn't call him dummy anymore. Earlier in the yard, she'd kept staring at him, and the more she looked, the less foolish Acha seemed compared to before. Before Acha had even brought up the reward, she gave him a peck. He treated him decent enough, but they weren't even freed 3 days before he went up the mountain to hunt and never came back. It was just him left in that house. Acha just needed someone to vent to. She let out a long breath, and the whole of her seemed to lighten. Acha wrapped his arms around her from behind and breathed into her ear. Whatever gloom she'd had, Acha had knocked it clean away. Acha carried her over. 10 meters of ground took them 10 minutes. Acha lay down, lifted the big cotton coat, and gently held her from behind. She scolded him playfully and pinched his thigh. There was a probing note in her voice, and a hopeful one too, waiting to see how Acha had answer. But if Acha had to compare, she really did come out ahead. Acha gave her a quick peck and she broke into a radiant smile. Acha really was growing fonder of her by the day, even if she knew perfectly well that half of it was just a sweet talk, but it made her happy all the same. That's when she remembered the firewood. In her current state, she could barely walk, let alone swing an axe at big logs. Acha stocked up at the foot of the mountain yesterday. So, let's not waste time. She'd been resting on his back for several minutes, and that stinging pain still hadn't faded. The more she thought about it, the angrier she got. All 100-some pounds of her, steady as if Acha were walking on flat ground. Acha was born in the year of the dog, and with that, she bit down again. Yesterday's, Acha had spent 2 hours hauling a wild boar with old Jiang, and after a night's rest, his shoulder itched even more. Acha reached back and slapped her behind. Just as she was about to start cursing, Acha lowered his voice. If someone caught him carrying her on his back, even if nothing was going on, there'd be no way to explain it. It took her 20 minutes to catch on. She'd been had. There was nobody at all. She shot him a look, her eyes full of playful reproach. A little fist came flying at his head. Near the village entrance, Acha dropped the firewood and let her catch her breath before heading in. Last time they'd shown up to an empty house, they'd sent someone to call him back from the fields. Wang Li's house, he flat out refused to show his face. The three exchanged a few pleasantries and stepped inside. Auntie Wang whispered something in Uncle Wang's ear, then went off to call their son. Auntie Liao studied their faces, her smile widening. This batch isn't all that big, but at least they dug up 2 roots. The crew boss got the biggest cut, 20 in 2 days. Hardly anyone in the whole East Village could pull that off. A sum like this didn't even register with them. She yanked her daughter forward and lavished praise on how hard-working and sensible her kids were. They've been trading game for so long that they knew each other well. Hunter Jean glanced at the 2 ginseng roots and suddenly remembered the one Acha had dug up the day before. Acha would take his crew out to dig it tomorrow. A matchmaker at his door. When it rains, it pours the good stuff. But that route, somebody already dug it up. That was a real big one. Someone had beaten him to it. The one who dug it. Old Jiang quit keeping him in suspense. Hunter Jiang took a slow drag before finally spitting out 3 words. It was Acha who dug it. Saw it with his own eyes. Both of those roots together weigh even more than this. That idiot kid actually dug up ginseng. He night Sao say halfway. Auntie Liao cut in, pulling Uncle Wang out of his daze. Acha helped him haul that wild boar back himself. He cut him 30 pounds of the meat. Of course, Acha can't swear he didn't already sell it off. Hunter Jiang dropped off the meat and left. They hadn't believed it at first, but Hunter Jiang had told it so convincingly. Liao Xiaofang leaned in close to her mother's ear. In her eyes, the He family was nothing but a flash in the pan. She shoved her son forward and hissed under her breath. The boy was homely, downright hard on the eyes. Set him next to Chow, and it was night and day. They settled it verbally and would pick an auspicious day later. The moment they stepped out the door, Liao Xiaofang got worked up. She thought it over for a moment, then whispered something in her daughter's ear. The two of them put their heads together and headed straight for the Hay family's place. The Hai family was the Hai family courtyard. Acha was going to dig up some wild greens. His little sister had taken over the household chores. Liao Xiaomin was injured and lay resting on the Kong bed. Before Xiai left, she warned her again and again. She called out tentatively, "In-law." No answer. Inside the house, Liao Xiaomin's brow furrowed. Suddenly, there came a clattering, rummaging sound from the main room. She waved at Xiao Fang, motioning for her to hide in the other room. Creak! The door opened, afraid her mother would rummage through everything. Liao's mother clutched her waist, her face twisted in pain. Every word she spoke was designed to put Xiaomin on the spot. Ma, Acha have to ask Achao first. If Acha leave and Achao comes back and can't find him, he'll worry so much. It's just a trip home. She could go, but only if Acha gave the okay. Liao's mother flew into a rage. The words came crashing down one after another. Liao Xiaomin's brow knotted tight, but still she wouldn't budge. Kind-hearted Xiaomin was left speechless. Liao's mother pressed closer with every word. Liao Xiaomin gave a slight shake of her head. Help him rub on some medicine just for one day. Liao's mother's eyes reamed, and she began to wipe away tears. Ma, please don't make this hard for him. Liao Xiaomin came up with a compromise. They threw him right, kicked out. Widow Liao wiped away another tear. Maha wouldn't do that. Every word cut into her heart like a knife. Widow Liao lifted her tear-soaked eyes. She pointed toward the main room. Liao Xiaomin was cut to the quick. Da Hong was the captain of the West Village production team. He went to another village for a meeting. The lie rolled right off Widow Liao's tongue. Before she could finish, Widow Liao dropped to one knee first, wailing at the top of her lungs. Acha did not even have anyone to see him off when Acha died. Widow Liao stood up, wiped her tears, and scrolled a crooked line of words on the table. Thud, Acha dropped the big bundle of wood on the ground. Chopping it for her is one thing, but Acha can't give her all of it. Acha was doing this for his dim-wit brother's sake. Acha did not see anywhere in the room. She won't answer when Acha call. Acha had gotten pretty natural at talking with the family. In the dim light, his wife was curled up in a ball wrapped in the blanket, refusing to show her head no matter what. Acha tried to pull back the blanket, but she clutched it tight, not making a sound. Acha put his hand. Acha reached under the covers and felt her forehead. The kerosene lamp glowed a dim yellow. Acha felt her forehead again. This time, it didn't seem so hot. He seemed to have something weighing on his mind. Probably missing his ma. Sure, father and son drank in big gulps. After starting a family, he'd saved up a good bit of money. But most of it went toward treating his ma's illness. And then, of all things, Acha got beaten senseless by someone. Thankfully, Acha was better now. And Acha had even picked up some skills. He lit a cigarette in the yard and rambled on for a good while. Only then did Acha understand Pi a little better. Acha had shot the breeze with Shu in half the morning. But now, with the liquor surging through him and his wife right beside him. The instant Acha lifted the covers, something soft slammed unexpectedly into his arms. But then she'd actually blindfolded his eyes with a cloth strip. Acha breathed a mouthful of liquor fumes right into her face, then quickly raised his hand to wipe it away. It was rare for her to take the lead like this tonight, and Acha could not let her down. Acha reached out again, but she hardly stopped him. In no more than 2 minutes, Acha was softly snoring. Acha opened his eyes to nothing but pitch black. The ones who drink often come out fine, while it's the poor soul who rarely gets hammered who pays the price. Acha yanked the cloth strip away and looked down. As his vision came into focus, his whole body froze. The one who played him for 2 solid hours last night wasn't his wife. Acha had only known his wife a few days. It was pitch dark and Acha had been so drunk Acha passed out cold. But Acha had no time to entertain any of that. Acha shoved her away and backhanded her across the face. Acha got up and started getting dressed, his voice cold. Acha grabbed her by the hair and slapped her again. Someone was already pounding on the door outside. Her crying had been loud enough to bring both his father and Xia running. His father roared from outside. His father demanded before Acha could say a word. The moment the two of them saw Liao Xiaofang sitting on the Kong bed, their faces changed instantly. Her little fists were clenched tight. "Liao Xiaofang," Acha said, his voice cold as ice. Last night, his mom waited until Xiai was taking a bath and had him sneak into the room. Then his mom took his sister away. She lowered her head, covering her face. Acha shot her a vicious glare and turned to his father. "This is such a hassle, and Acha really don't want to bother Uncle Wan." Liao Xiaofang called out behind him. A few minutes later, Acha reached Hunter Zhang Place. The very woman who'd once offered him a corn bun. The second she saw him, her heart skipped a beat. That made her even more uneasy, and she took 2 steps back. Acha had liked to borrow the big cart. Acha figured Acha had bring the Jangs a couple packs of cigarettes later. Once the woodshed was open, Acha walked straight in to wheel out the cart. With that thought, she followed him inside, grabbed the cart's handle, and made up her mind to have a talk with him. But right then, Acha had bigger fish to fry. Acha sure couldn't just grab it by force. She'd barely gotten his name out. Her hand rested on his shoulder. It was only later that Acha pieced together what had happened at the Liao family's place in West Village that day. Liao tricked her younger sister into coming home. She tied her up, then turned right around and arranged a marriage for her. The whole thing went off without a hitch. The wedding party untied the ropes only to bind her up again, practically carrying her off. The matchmaker, seeing a bride kick up such a fuss for the first time, knotted her brows. Halfway there, Liao Xiaomin got so worked up that she passed out. Her elder daughter, Xiao Fang, was skilled at everything. Acha asked around the whole way, paying people to guide him, and finally tracked down Liao's house. Moments ago, Acha had swept the place with his sensing ability. She narrowed her eyes, probably calculating. She was just about to invite him into the back room, but what she got instead was a slap. She covered her face, looking every bit as wretched as Liao Xiaofang had moments ago. Acha would ask one more time. She headed off in that direction. This Sunlicht's temper was terrifying today, and his eyes carried a warning. So, she begged him to find her another match. Acha did not believe a single word of it. Only because there were people watching outside did Acha swallow back his killing intent. For now, Acha had to find her first. Acha only found out later that someone had taken pity on her and pulled the cloth out of Liao Xiaomin's mouth. Flack. 2 minutes later, all 4 of them were beaten black and blue. Acha did not say much, just forced them to tell him which way the girl had run. Some young guy on a black bicycle came out of nowhere, didn't say a word, and beat the tar out of them. Each member of the wedding party tilted up his bruised face. Zhao Diong was the uncle of the brothers Xiao Deshan and Xiao Erhan. She's the wife of some idiot back in their East Village. Acha paid $30 for a second-hand bride. That half-wit's carrying a few old wild ginseng roots, and he hasn't sold them yet. Last time he beat up him and his brother too. His eyes were full of hatred. He goes up to Dama Mountain a lot, plus his own judgment. His wife had most likely gone into this mountain. Acha looked up at the sky. When Acha get her back, Acha was going to kill her. She was trapped at the bottom, deeper than a person as tall. She tried to climb out, but her injured leg gave her no strength. She hugged her knees, curled up in the dark corner, crying helplessly. She didn't want to die. There was still so much she hadn't done, and she kept worrying whether Acha was out there searching for her aimlessly, wearing himself out. Crying and crying, hungry and exhausted, she drifted off into unconsciousness. She had no idea how much time had passed, when, in the haze of her dreams, a voice seemed to be calling her. Her head resting on her knees snapped up. A faint sliver of light slanted down into the pit. Her heart had never pounded like this before. Tears came streaming down, but she just couldn't get the words out. Clear's throat. She wanted to say, "Hey Chow, Acha was here." The moment his feet hit the ground, a limping figure threw itself into his arms. Sob. So she held on so tight, as if afraid Acha had vanished the instant she blinked. So she could only press against his ear and speak in small breathy gasps. His scolding was harsh, but his heart had melted into mush. She threw herself at him and cried again, her little fists pounding against his back, as if in protest. By the lantern's light, Acha bent down to look at her foot. Acha looked up toward the mouth of the pit. If a hungry tiger or a black bear came tumbling down from above, that would be it. She gripped the rope, but she was leaning on him for pretty much all of it. She circled around from the front to his back and locked her arms tight around his waist. Acha loosened the rope, bent down, and hoisted her onto his back. On the way, Acha slipped by accident. Her face was pale, her head resting against his shoulder. Acha pointed at the front of his shirt. She looked, and her pale face flushed crimson in an instant. Back and forth they went, and the mood turned light. Along the way, Acha had casually grabbed a few handfuls of medicinal herbs. Actually, Acha had pulled them out of his storage space, along with some food. Acha chewed the herbs into a paste, applied it carefully, and bandaged her up by the firelight. She stared at him without blinking, her eyes growing brighter the longer she watched. Her eyes were full of nothing but him. But then she looked down at herself, filthy with mud, and her gaze dimmed. She said that meeting him in this life was worth every bit of luck she'd ever had. From this moment on, Acha was her everything. She was curled up in his arms, a padded jacket over her upper body, and a coat covering her lower half. She reached out, tugged the clothes toward him, and snuggled deeper into his chest. Neither of them had eaten all day. One of them had scoured the whole mountain searching. The other had run for her life. The old man and his sister must be worried sick. So Acha had no choice but to carry her on his back. Around noon, Acha brought her back from West Village. Acha did not go settle the score with Andy Liao. On the way, she told him everything, one thing at a time. Remember, other than the old man and his sister, don't trust anyone. A dozen pairs of eyes swung their way in unison. And Auntie Leo's, he already took her away, had sent everyone home. They'd kept watch all morning and were just about to head out again when Acha made it home. Acha would treat everyone to a meal one of these days. A kindness, however small, is something Acha never dare forget. She couldn't win against him, so she just lowered her head. Can't even wash someone down without getting fresh. Acha. She wanted to say she could wash up herself, but knowing how domineering Acha had always been, she knew there was no point in refusing. Drink a bowl of brown sugar water first. Watching him fuss over her, she was so happy it scared her. And if it really was a dream, she prayed she'd never wake up. Only the two of them men were left in the yard. Old man handed him a cigarette. Acha sat down on the stool to soak some sun. Acha put it between his lips and looked at him. He struck a match with a scratch and lit it for him himself. He leaned in, his eyes full of hope. He grabbed a hammer and was about to charge out. Acha was going to go beat the crap out of Louis. The corner of his mouth twitched. Acha was going to go dig up his grave. Acha did not back down for anyone. He looked reluctant, like he really would go dig it up. After hearing the whole story of how Acha got beaten, he was so furious he wanted to grab the hammer again. Those two who hurt so many people had already been cut down by a single stroke of Tun Guang's blade. That was probably the one thing that brought him relief today. That didn't sound like something Pai would do. Only after his little sister and Acha gave her a good beating. Is that true? Back then, Acha thought she was his wife. Acha mean, she got off easy. He snorted coldly. Acha was going to go find Liao's mother in West Village and set things straight. He stared at the way Acha was smoking, his eyes turning cold. Acha gave him a long, hard look. Then Acha knew his limits. The two of them shared a grin and each lit another cigarette. This time, though, he didn't light his for him. After his wife can get back on her feet, they needed to restock the household supplies anyway. Even without putting it in the storage space, it wouldn't spoil. Acha had to make money, build a new house. After lunch, just as Acha was about to do the laundry, his sister rushed over and took it from him. As the big brother, Acha should always give in to her. Running the radar, trekking over mountains, carrying his wife on his back. Once Acha coaxed his wife to sleep, Acha dozed off for a bit to catch up on rest. This score with Widow Liao wasn't settled and it was eating at him. She lowered her head, but her two little hands clung tightly to the hem of his shirt. Her voice was so faint, Acha could barely hear it. Acha brought his sister inside to keep her company, grabbed his knife, hopped on his bike, and headed for West Village. Both their faces were beaten black and blue. Acha would have him sent to a labor camp. Widow Liao shrieked at the top of her lungs. The moment he came in, he gave her a beating and left with a warning. Acha won't marry Wang Liz Ho, and Acha definitely won't marry Zhao Diong Sab. They were in the wrong to begin with, foisting the already married off on the man, only to have him snatch her away at the wedding. Acha only lied because Acha was scared. It even hurts to walk now. Xiao Fang kept spinning the story, her face flushing red. A loud crash outside the yard made everyone jump. The gate they just fixed got kicked flat to the ground again. Before Acha could even step inside, someone behind him yanked him hard, shoved him aside, and planted himself in the doorway. Datang, don't let this idiot in. Miliao clutched her waist, her head still ringing. Daong never expected this idiot would dare hit him. Before the words were even out, Acha had already charged into the house. Miliao opened her mouth wide and howled, covering her face with both hands, as if that would keep her safe. Liao Xiaofang suddenly threw herself in front of her mother. One kick and Acha sent her into the wall again, knocking the wind out of her. Acha dropped them first and asked questions later. Acha trained in freestyle fighting in his past life, and with this build handling these few was no problem at all. Acha had better get in a few more hits now. Acha wound up his arm and pounded away at Maliao. She passed out again on the spot. Acha dropped to the ground and rolled. Good thing Acha had stashed the knife and the card in his storage space before entering the village. Otherwise, this whole thing would have escalated for sure, and Acha might have ended up getting shot. The women's director threw herself between them and helped him up. Sis. Acha played the fool all the way, but Acha did not expect her to pull him straight into her arms. She was the sister his mother had taken in. She and his mother had gone through Shanhuan together back when they fled to the northeast. When she was 8, she was on the verge of starving to death, and his mother shared her last bite of food with her. He's the one who beat all of them up. The captain had gone half mad beside himself with rage, but the militia just tucked the rifle behind his back to keep it away from him. Acha huddled behind Lu Hongmei, peeking out with half his head showing. Acha knew exactly what kind of person old lady Liao is. Lu Hongmei stood in front of him, shielding him. This idiot came to West Village to stir up trouble, and Acha was the brigade captain. And the moment he planted himself in the doorway, his sheer presence pressed down on the whole room until no one could breathe. The whole thing was simple. Old lady Liao had married off his idiot wife to someone else, and now the idiot had come to collect the debt fair and square. The mighty brigade captain couldn't manage a single. The militia captain's words cut off any way out. Lu Hongmei, take the idiot back to the village. She'd looked after both his sister and him back in the day, so there was no awkwardness between them. Acha really couldn't keep up the act anymore. She borrowed a bicycle, hauled him onto it, and headed for the East Village. The whole ride, Acha did as she wanted and held on to her from behind. It was pitch dark by the time they made it back to the East Village. Xiaoi came bounding over and threw herself at Lu Hongmei, leaving him, her own brother, out in the cold. Lu Hongmei laughed and pinched her cheek. Oldie's face was all smiles as he turned to make introductions. Xiaomin wiped her hands in the kitchen and came out to greet them, limping. Acha hurried over to help her. Even injured, she wouldn't let go of the housework. The three women huddled together, chattering away about everything under the sun. Lu Hongmei asked half in disbelief. Last time he took down 7 hazel grass with 1 arrow. Acha was chatting and laughing with old he, without a trace of foolishness about him. A huge pot of wild boar came off the stove. This piece is a good one. Acha dropped some meat into Xiaomin's bowl. Acha picked up a nice piece half fat and half lean. She wanted him to play dumb to her face and keep on fooling her. Acha would just eat his food. Old man, let's have a drink. Old he was all cheerful. Acha can't really hold his liquor. So, Lu Hongmei told them all about what happened in Shuyin. Everyone listened dumbstruck, especially Xia, whose eyes grew brighter and brighter with sheer admiration. She was grateful and worried all at once. Honey, go rest in the room. Acha reached out to help her, but Xia snatched her away. Brother, tonight Acha was sleeping with sis-in-law and sis. That left him and the old man in the courtyard staring at each other. Old, he tossed out the line as he wobbled off into the house. Half asleep, Acha naturally pulled the person into his arms. The booze was still in him, and his hands and feet got bolder and bolder. Even a little nuzzling gets resisted like this. Acha can't very well force it. And so Acha held her and slept through the night, resting easy. Up this early and injured too. Acha's side got dressed and stepped outside, and the other two came out one by one. Liao Xiaomin said, her voice full of concern. She thought about it seriously. Guess Acha missed his wife so much Acha was dreaming. That's when Acha noticed Lu Hongmei standing behind them, frowning, not looking too good. She brushed back her hair and turned her face away. Acha reached out and touched her forehead. She knocked his hand away and shot him a glare so sharp it could kill. A giant question mark popped up over his head. She wouldn't take it, so Acha blocked her way and wouldn't let go until she finally gave in. Old, he tried to talk him out of it, and he was afraid that now that his head was finally right again, Acha had to go stir up trouble. They would swing by West Village later and give him a real good thrashing. Acha grabbed her cheek and pinched. If she couldn't go, then Acha could not either. After 3 rounds of pleading, Acha had no choice but to promise Acha would not go make trouble in West Village. It was her first time seeing his young wife, so she was this pretty homely and quietly breathed a sigh of relief. She'd been worried old. He might have found him some homely girl. She used to bring meat over to their place all the time. Acha explained patiently. But Hengjian just straight at him. It looks just like the one his sister-in-law and Acha have. All 3 of them turned to stare at the top of Hengjian's head at once. Sure enough, Acha's sister Honglian was at a loss for words. Had someone pick it up for him from the supply co-op, she blurted out. Acha had wanted to stay home and keep his wife company. But life goes on, and money's got to be earned. Take some food for the road and come back early. Liao Xiaomin's face was full of reluctance to see him go. Without caring whether anyone was around, Acha planted a hard kiss right on her cheek. Acha knew what she wanted to ask, so Acha just laid it out. Acha banged his head, and his simpleton condition suddenly cleared up. Then these past few days have been such a blur. Acha can barely remember any of it. Acha put on a thoughtful look. He'd been on watch for a full day and night without spotting a single soul. Acha was going to head down to the village for some grub. Take some men and search the idiot's house. See if there's any ginseng. Brains are a good thing to have. Deshawn ran off down the mountain with a smirk, his head full of filthy little fantasies. It's a long way around. Every stretch of the way, Acha had swept the area with his radar. Acha pulled home and down beside him, and they sat there for a good while. Acha asked her what was over that way. Acha led Homie in around the red dots, taking the side trail instead. It was just holding hands. Before long, they reached the spot where she'd bathed last time. Remembering how she'd looked then, Acha grabbed his slingshot and turned to face her, but his eyes went right past her shoulder, locking onto a pine tree. Drawn back full, breath held, Hung stared, transfixed. A dozen yards off, a gray squirrel dropped with a thud. Squirrel meat was tasty, and the pelts fetched a few cents apiece. Figured Acha had bring in a little extra for the family. Acha answered while looking for the squirrels. Borrowed it from Sister Widow Shawan, just as they were talking. A beastly roar rolled in from far away, mighty and fierce, enough to make the treetops tremble. Usually won't come down out of the deep mountains. Acha wondered whether his prey tracking could level up. 100 meters was still too close. Sister Honglian. Sounds like there's something over here. The doe 150 or 60. Her belly swollen. Close to giving birth. Sister Honglian reached for the hunting rifle, only then realizing Acha had been holding her hand the whole time. She flicked off the safety, laid her finger on the trigger, taking aim. A double barrel's got a lot of stopping power, but the aim's off. As Acha spoke, Acha had already knocked an arrow to the string. Hunting's got an order to it. Red Lotus thought it over for a second. They both set their stances at the same time. The iron-tipped arrow tore through the air, spinning straight for the buck's neck. The buck took the arrow and bolted in a panic. Red Lotus brought her knife down, then bent over the buck's neck and took 2 mouthfuls. She hadn't dared drink much, worried she couldn't handle it. The word tonic got him interested. Acha leaned down and drank deep. Red Lotus rushed to stop him. Acha wiped the blood from his lips. Salty with a hint of sweet and not gamey at all. She figured she'd only heard about it. Acha stared at the flowing deer blood, feeling a pain. Had to store it up. Acha was making an offering to the mountain god. Acha grabbed the full canteen of deer blood and ran off a good distance, poured a little onto the ground, and made a show of bowing. But when Acha came back to collect, there wasn't much blood left. Acha had finished this off and just hunt another one. Good thing Acha bought 2 or 3 extra bottles at the supply co-op last time, or Acha would have really lost out on this haul. Red Lotus and Acha got to work on the buck. The blade glided along and a whole deer hide came off in no time. Acha sized it up in his head. The tenderloin was tender and springy, the leg meat firm and chewy, the ribs marbled just right. Acha sliced off the deer penis with one cut. "Chia, take it easy there," Red Lotus said suddenly, giving him a knowing look. She was worried about his little wife. She rolled her eyes at him. Once the deer blood was down, they were both flushed red and burning hot all over. Every now and then, Acha switched on prey tracking. There were red dots, but nothing headed their way, and Acha could not tell what they were. The game was too heavy. They each carried half Red Lotus. She had a burlap sack and a hunting rifle on her. This gal about his height and tough as nails. The guts inside had to be a good 10 plus B. Acha had had too much deer blood. His whole body was itching with heat, and all Acha could think about right now was crack. The sky had only just turned dark a moment ago, and in a blink, a gale swept through. The trees all bent to one side, rustling loudly. Acha peeled off his blood-soaked jacket in one motion, revealing his faintly flushed abs. Acha glanced at Sisis Hungli, who was peeling off her jacket and swallowed hard. The more Acha looked, the drier his mouth got. When they had first stepped into the dim light, his eyes hadn't adjusted. But what really made his heart skip a beat was the gun buried under the dirt. Before the match went out, Acha yanked the gun free and held it up in front of her. She looked up at him and suddenly thought of someone. The two of them fiddled with it, the rust crackling under their fingers. Acha would take it into town another day and have someone fix it. Come into town with him later to sell their season, and they would get it fixed on the way. Acha wanted to cut through the trail, but the red markers were gone, probably washed away by the downpour. When they got to her house, Auntie Lee Sanmei invited him in to sit, but Acha quickly declined and took off running. Behind him, Acha heard the auntie's pained muttering. He's just had too much deer blood in a hurry to get home to his wife. The auntie's voice suddenly rose, and here Acha thought he was just joking. Lin was happy for his family. Sure, this deer was Acha's kill anyway. There was no one home at Widow Shuan's place. Damn, that left him all penned up. For something like this, Acha needed someone who could handle it. A few minutes later, Acha spotted her from a distance, weeding with a few other women. A mud pellet hit her dead on from 30 meters away. Acha had to force down to a science. She turned around and immediately caught sight of him waving under the big tree. Villagers noticed Widow Shuan looked healthier lately, and their teasing made the private connection between her and Acha feel increasingly dangerous. Suddenly, she half-crouched, clutching her stomach. Acha did not feel too good. Acha would head back on his own. Holding her belly, she trotted all the way home. The moment she pushed the door open, a burning embrace rushed to meet her. Her body went soft as she fell into his arms, her arms naturally hooking around his neck. Before she could finish, Acha kissed her. Sister Honglian handed his sister the tenderloin and dear heart. She peeked into the inner room, but didn't see Lia Xiaomin and didn't see him either. Xia grinned, flashing her white teeth. Didn't not come back to find his wife. The house seemed to have sprung a leak, and inside it was a mess, like someone had ransacked it. She and Xiao had also just gotten back from outside, where they'd been looking after Andy Lee Sam. At that moment, his voice came from outside the door. Acha flashed a sheepish grin and hurried to change the subject. Sister Honglian and Acha bagged a big buck today. The trunk chest was a total mess. Good thing his feathers are still here. What? His expression darkened. Acha went inside and looked around, and just like that, Acha understood the thief was after the ginseng. Acha slipped around to the back of the house and pulled out the ginseng wrapped in birch bark. Acha could not be bothered to deal with her. The thief who ransacked the house was most likely one of those two red dots halfway up the mountain. She knew she shouldn't pry, but curiosity got the better of her. Acha lay back on the hay, a stalk of grass between his teeth. Her question made him raise an eyebrow. Went to return the cart to Hunter Jiang. Borrowed it from the West Village yesterday. Had some free time today, so Acha brought it back. At Husuan's place, though, Acha had spent over an hour. The moment the words left her mouth, she regretted them. At the end of the day, she was an outsider, as a woman of virtue. A straight shadow fears no crooked light. From now on, she'd have to watch what she said. Gossip and idle chatter often cut deeper than any knife. Go ahead, say it. Acha got up, leaned in close to her ear, and muttered a couple of words. She swung her arm at him. He saw him hauling the deer alongside a bold-spirited young woman, both of them wearing the hairpins Acha bought last time. Acha was not homely and snapped. Lu Guamping gave an awkward little chuckle. The big buck went on the scale. 98 caddies. Acha just smiled and said nothing. Still, the hide alone was a fine haul. He gave him a thumbs up. That's all his sister's doing. In the past, whatever home Holy caught, she either ate herself or sold to the villagers. Hong Luan and Acha exchanged a glance, both a little surprised. The first thing she did was rush over to the fabric, hoping to make her mother a new dress. Lu Guamping got suspicious when he saw him clutching the sack so tightly. Acha gave it a careless shake. Acha asked, testing the waters. And Acha brought up Uncle Wang as cover. Acha wanted to feel out what the co-op was paying. This chunk of ginseng in his hand weighed close to 60 g, and if Acha did not unload it fast, it could spell trouble. Maybe even big trouble. These days, good stuff was a hot potato. The older and better the quality, the more it's worth. His heart skipped a beat. 25 bucks for 10 g was no small sum in these times. Lu Guamping looked him up and down. Acha had a big bow slung over his shoulder. His clothes and pants were all patched up and stained with blood, no less. Twice what third class goes for. Then Acha suddenly leaned in close. Tough to swing meant there was a way. Acha wanted to buy a bike. Every year, plenty of people got killed by those beasts. As long as Acha had a gun, anything was possible. A young man who didn't even own a gun. That kind of thing came down to skill, not luck. Holmes suddenly held up a piece of floral cloth. She turned her back to him. But Acha saw that little smile at the corner of her mouth. The two of them picked out a whole pile of things, but there weren't enough coupons. He clearly thought he was being generous. Fine, let's leave it at that for now. This wasn't a one-time deal. As they were settling up, Sister Honglian suddenly remembered something her mom had told her to get. Grab him 2 cartons of cigarettes. The wagon pulled away from the supply co-op, rolling farther and farther down the road. Acha asked, sitting on her right. Acha wanted to sell some ginseng. She spun back around, cheeks flushing red, wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, and pretended nothing had happened. Acha just don't know if there's a buyer at the black market, selling ginseng in broad daylight. Sounds like selling to the co-op is the safer bet. Mr. Honglian suddenly asked about the size of Acha's ginseng root, leaving him momentarily speechless at how bluntly she phrased the question. The eager look in Sister Honglian's eyes was almost scary. She'd never seen ginseng before. Acha coughed twice, feeling oddly guilty for no reason. Before long, they arrived at a general store selling bamboo baskets, brooms, wooden goods, and straw insoles. Acha quietly switched on his tracking radar. Acha turned off the radar, so that meant the other 2 were customers. Later, Acha found out his name was Lin Wei-jun. He'd been running all over the place, all to find a single route of aged wild ginseng to keep his fiancé's grandfather alive. That stuff's not easy to come by. The woman in the chi old he beside him softly agreed. He pulled out 2 yuan and stuffed it into Uncle Wei's hand. The woman in the chi pao stumbled with a little gasp and fell right into his arms, warm and soft. Almost on instinct, Acha threw an arm around her waist and yanked her back. She tumbled into his arms again, her cheeks flushing crimson before she flustered and shoved him away. Son of a threw another punch, and again she blocked it. She shielded him behind her, her eyes sharp. Hong Lin stood half a head taller than him. She'd already won half the battle on presence alone. He just turned and yelled at him. Acha swept Hong Lian behind him with one arm. Before he'd finished, a punch came flying. Acha stood his ground and opened his hand. Acha whipped out a kick and drove it hard into his gut. One arm locked in his grip, the other clutching his stomach, his face twisted in pain. The woman in the chow held him up, pleading in a soft voice. Hey, don't start trouble in his place. Acha locked his eyes on Uncle Wei and said word by word, Boss. Acha, deal with things as they are. Son, do him a favor and let go first. With his answer, Acha gave Lin Wei-jun a cold look. The woman in the chow cut him off, pulling 5 yuan from her purse. Jun, they still need to find that mountain ginseng for Grandpa. She turned and bowed deeply to him. When a lady treats him with courtesy, naturally, Acha returned the favor. The moment Acha let go, Lin Wei-jun lunged at him, but Ruan half pushed, half dragged him out the door. People who can only run their mouths are exactly the kind Acha despised most. Acha dropped the idea of leaving. Acha tore open a fresh pack of cigarettes and offered him one. He paused for a couple of seconds before taking it. He'd seen at a glance that the gun was already junk. If that's too steep, Acha had got new ones here too. Parts are hard to come by. It'll be a few days. Acha already had the cash out. Acha, Uncle Wei. We'll be back in a few days. Then with a single line, Acha cut off whatever Sister Honglian was about to explain. Uncle Wei looked over his whole scruffy get-up. No way did Acha look like someone carrying an old mountain ginseng. He didn't believe him, but he believed Sister Honglian. And the moment Acha peeled back the birch bark, clang clang. Truth is, Acha did not want to sell to Lin Wei-jun either. The longer Acha held on to it, the more dangerous it got. The supply co-op offered 25, but in his hands, it could easily go for several times that. She turned, saw the serious look on his face. Acha can't shake the feeling someone's watching them. Acha stared toward the distant hillside. Trees blocked his view, but that red dot on his radar was crystal clear, dead still. 2 hunts now, and Acha had been the one to find every single kill. She started to get down, but Acha stopped her. She wanted to go in his place, but she had no gun, and her aim with a bow was no match for his. Acha crept up the mountain, following the direction of the red dot, quiet as Acha could. The moment Acha got spotted, the game would bolt, or the game would shoot him first. Acha had never seen him before. He had a rifle raised, aimed right at the stretch of road ahead of Sister Honglian. Good man or bad, anyone who threatened him had to go. His head dropped, and he never moved again. Acha pulled out the arrow and rinsed the blood off with clean water. A single-barrel shotgun in better shape than the one Acha dropped off for repairs. Searching the dead attacker produced $60-some. And by dusk Acha was carrying his large bow back down the mountain. Sister Honglin had nearly come up looking for him. Killing a man like that, Acha felt not a shred of guilt. But by the time Acha got there, all that was left was a bunch of tracks. Guess Acha made too much noise and spooked it off. Acha, walked at the head of the cart, holding up a horse lantern to light the way while Home and sat on the shaft driving the horse. The voice rang out bright enough to pierce the whole night. That one call, and his heart went warm. As Acha got closer, Acha saw the silly wife was there too. Acha gave her cheek a pinch and turned to look at his wife. Every word laced with the careful worry of someone afraid she'd done something wrong. Just hearing it made his heart ache. There was a scolding note in his voice. Leah couldn't stop her, no matter how she tried. Acha shoved the horse lantern into his little sister's hands. Acha turned around and hoisted his wife onto his back. Ah, Sister Honglian and his little sister are both watching, she protested. Squirming, Acha gave her backside a light smack and instantly she buried her face into his back, not daring to make a sound. His little sister chattered as she nimbly untied the ropes on the cart. Her can of food was long gone, and she was dead sure Acha had buy her another one. Liao Xiaomin was still draped over his back, her fingertips lightly pinching the small of his back. She'd been begging him to put her down since halfway home, but Acha just wouldn't. Hurry up and put him down. But what Acha did next left her absolutely dying of embarrassment right on the spot. One of tenderloin with wood ear mushrooms, and one of stir-fried squirrel with shallots. They bagged for that morning, and cooked up too. Even his little sister downed nearly half a bowl. After dinner, Sister Honglian helped wash the dishes and tidy up, and was about to head home with La Sanmei. Old He held his pipe, dumbstruck. Sister Honglian and Acha exchanged a glance. So, the cigarettes were a gift for Old He. They had agreed Acha deserved the larger share, while Sister Honglian already felt she had spent too much of their money on supplies. Besides, his family had always been looked after by her mother. Acha gave her a pat into her palm. When his mother passed, Old He gritted his teeth and raised 2 half-grown kids on his own. Huiyan hurriedly started counting the money. Acha reached out to stop her, and their 2 hands clasped tightly together. Acha leaned close to her ear and lowered his voice. They might just be one family from now on. The hairpin Acha gave her was still in her hair. At the co-op, Acha told her she had a pretty smile. She glanced over at Liao Xiaomin, a short distance away, and her heart sank again. She let out an "oh" and drifted out the door like she'd lost her soul. But on the inside, he was beaming. This household was no longer his to carry alone. The father and son chatted in the yard. Oh, why? Acha was going to go wash up first. Acha watched her limping figure from behind, caught somewhere between amusement and heartache. This time she was finally willing to be open with him. This arm of his got hurt before, and sometimes it just won't listen to him. His silly wife actually believed him. Looks like from now on, Acha would have to keep his tall tails in check. She had a wound on her foot and couldn't get it wet, so washing took a while. Acha held her up as they walked toward the house. Truth be told, Acha wanted to carry her inside, but it wouldn't look right with his little sister around. She smiled, showing a row of pearly white teeth. She gave a little nod, her eyes glistening with tears. She used to be exactly that kind of person. Acha, she was never one for words. But for a wife this shy to go even this far, that alone was something rare. She gave him a soft little punch with her fist, and to shut up this teasing mouth of his. The next morning, at daybreak, still half asleep, Acha felt someone shifting against him. It was his wife, carefully trying to wriggle out of his arms. Her flushed cheek pressed against his chest, brimming with happiness. She was so thoughtful, it made his chest tighten. Acha curled up the corner of his mouth and gave her thigh a gentle squeeze. Only then did she react. She responded, her face flushing crimson as she buried herself against his chest. The second she pushed herself up, her face scrunched with pain. Acha felt bad for her, but Acha could not help smiling. She watched, dazed, as Acha tucked the blanket around her, then kissed her forehead before heading out. A moment later, his little sister poked her head in. Acha, it's probably just the Kang bed being too hot. Last night, Acha deliberately laid down a fresh sheet, worried about staining the Kang bed mat. Hey, before she could finish, Shia had already darted out the door. Go check on her quick. Her face was full of worry. Out in the yard, his father, having a smoke, cracked a grin too. Won't be long before there's a grandkid to hold. Just as Acha was about to leave, someone came into the yard. It was Uncle Wang. Wang Xiao, heading up the mountain. Acha told him to take the day off and skip work. He set the tools down and offered a cigarette. Wang Xiang took the cigarette, and his eyelid twitched. This smoke was pricier than the Washa brand. A few days back at the black market, Wang had pulled some strings through a contact to line up a buyer. He wouldn't even glance at the small stuff. He remembered Hunter Zhang mentioning that Acha had dug up a big ginseng root and hadn't sold it yet. Hey, that Rudd, he hasn't sold it yet. Oldie shot a glance at him as Acha headed for the door. He called out to stop him. He ushered him into the back room, and the three of them sat down still around the table for tea. Well, his character was exactly what Acha did not trust. Seeing that neither his father nor Acha would take the bait, he let out a long sigh. Even if Acha weren't there, he'd wait for him to get back before deciding anything. A flicker of barely concealed contempt crossed Wang Shang's eyes. The way he saw it, there was only one reason Acha had come back from town, without selling it. As for how he decided his route, was no good. Some wet-behind-the-years kid who'd gotten lucky and stumbled onto a ginseng route. He held up 6 fingers and waved them twice in front of them. He sucked in a sharp breath. He was so excited his hands trembled, but he forced himself to stay quiet, his eyes fixed intently on him. He'd gotten into town ahead of everyone to sell ginseng. Years in the trade had made him sharp. Word traveled to him fast. The way they saw it, Acha had no clue how to preserve the thing. Wang Shang molded over and gave him a second, more approving look. The kid's not stupid after all. But then he sneered inwardly. He's just angling for a higher price. He held up 2 index fingers, crossing them into an X, tapping them together again and again, his face solemn. He started to speak, then swallowed it back down, though it was plain as day. He wanted to sell 500 yuan, not 5. Still, he forced down the churning in his chest and waited for him to give the word. He was getting anxious now, terrified. His fool streak was acting up again. Acha caught it. Uncle Jiang had told him a treasure like this shouldn't be flashed around in front of people. The way he tensed up, he almost seemed worried on his behalf. The one who rummaged through their place that day. Take a look, Uncle Wang. Acha spread the birch bark open on the table. The whole East Village already knew Acha had dug up a ginseng root anyway. Letting him see it would give his possum face too. He was even starting to wonder if his slough wasn't quite fixed yet. Acha explained that he and Sister Honglian had sold the earlier root through the cooperative for 28 yuan. Then uncovered the larger ginseng. It took him a while to snap out of it. The big ones fake, and the small ones, the real deal. The only ones who'd seen the real ginseng were his family. Sister Honglian, Uncle Jiang, and Uncle Wei. The look on his face was even better than the lie Acha had cooked up. He got up to leave, muttering to himself, his steps heavier than when he'd arrived. Chow, this what in the world is going on? The real ginseng safely hidden away. It looked different from the last one. The guy had offered 10 yuan a gram, and yet Acha had not budged, wondering why Acha did not sell it to Uncle Wang. Acha held up 2 fingers and made a little pinching motion. Acha blew out a puff of smoke. Acha finished his sentence for him. He wants to buy it cheap from them, then turn around and sell it high to someone else. That son of a Wang. Acha explained to old he that Uncle Wang's generous ginseng offer was still low, because the buyer clearly expected to resell the root for much more. Elsewhere, bruised old lady Liao approached the Wang household and arranged a marriage involving Liao Xiaofang while trying to secure protection from Zhao Dong. The Wang family offered substantial betrothal money, tempting her even though she knew the violent problems surrounding. Xiaofang had not disappeared. Xiao Dashan soon appeared, looking for Zhao Diong, linking the same hostile circle to the valuable mountain treasure Acha had recently uncovered. When Acha invited Sister Honglin back into the mountains, she claimed she felt unwell and refused, so he continued the trip alone. Passing Widow Shawan's home, Acha discovered that flour, cornmeal, cloth, and other supplies he had left there were unexpectedly gone. He postponed that mystery and climbed Dama Mountain, where the radar showed one moving red target near the area he had been watching. The target was Xiao Dashan, so Acha chose the quieter bow, waited from cover, and put an arrow through the man's thigh. Before Xiao Dashan could shout for help, Acha restrained and silenced him, then demanded the truth about the recent break-in. Under pressure, Xiao Dashan named Uncle Wang as the person behind the search of Acha's property. He also identified Zhao Diong as the uncle involved in earlier mountain trouble and the scheme surrounding Liao Xiaofang. That description matched the armed man Acha had already killed on the road, finally confirming Zhao Diong's identity after the fact. Acha then questioned whether Xiao Dashan had attacked old he, but the captive denied responsibilities strongly enough that Acha believed him. The remaining suspicion pointed toward Louis, the man connected to the old affair that originally left Acha's body mentally damaged. Xiao Dashan begged for release after answering everything, but Acha had already decided that a dangerous witness could not be left behind. Acha knocked him unconscious, removed the restraints, and killed him in a ways to erase obvious signs of interrogation. He stored the body temporarily, cleaned the scene, and mentally gave Uncle Wang one final chance, because the older man had helped his family before. Any future attempt against Acha's wife, father, sister, or property would end that mercy immediately. Acha moved deeper into the mountains with the confiscated hunting rifle, deliberately choosing a different valley before disposing of Xiao Dashan's body. Once the area was clear, the radar revealed several red signals clustered together farther ahead, giving him a target for firearm practice. Closing to roughly 70 meters, Acha discovered the signals belonged to a small herd of young wild boars feeding in the valley. Deeper in the mountains, Acha finally identified the clustered red signals as a small herd of young wild boars. He closed the distance carefully, hiding until his bow and old hunting rifle could both be used before the animals scattered. An arrow flew first, then the rifle fired almost immediately, dropping 2 boars before the rest of the herd escaped. The system rewarded the firearm kill with proficiency and increased his reliable shooting range to 62 meters. That notification finally proved his marksmanship was not static. Successful firearm kills could continue improving the skill over time. Acha dressed both boars, gathered medicinal herbs for his wife's injured foot, and stored whatever extra food he could preserve. By late afternoon, he returned to East Village carrying enough fresh game to draw a crowd before he even reached home. The villagers had seen too many successful hunts to keep dismissing every result as the dumb luck of a harmless simpleton. Acha offered the fresh pork for 40 cents a pound, warning that this favorable price would not become a permanent habit. People immediately rushed home for cash, afraid the 2 fresh boars would be sold out before they made it back.